Where did it all begin? Before there were philosophers, there were people looking up at the sky, trying to make sense of it. Not with telescopes or textbooks, just with their eyes, their instincts, and a need to understand what was going on around them. The question, where did it all begin, is one of the oldest in human thought. It's not just about time or history. It's about origin. How did the world get here? What was the first thing? Early humans answered with myths. Maybe the world came from a giant egg, or was created by gods fighting in the sky. These stories were powerful. They helped people explain the unknown. But eventually, a few thinkers decided to take a different approach. They looked for patterns, causes, and physical explanations. Instead of asking who made the world, they asked what it's made of. This is where philosophy begins, not with answers, but with a different kind of question. That shift from myth to method is the foundation of philosophy. It marked a new way of thinking about the world, one that didn't just accept what had been told, but tried to figure things out from the ground up. As simple as it sounds, asking, where did it all begin, opened the door to every scientific and philosophical theory that followed. It's not just the start of the universe, it's the start of human reasoning. Thales. Most people look at the world and see things, rocks, rivers, clouds. Thales looked at the world and saw a question. What is everything made of? That single shift from describing nature to trying to explain it with reason is why many consider him the first true philosopher in the Western tradition. Thales lived in Miletus, a bustling city on the coast of what's now Turkey, around 600 BCE. At a time when myths were still the main way people made sense of nature, Thales suggested something radical, that the world operated on principles you could observe, analyze, and maybe even predict. His main claim was surprisingly specific. He believed that everything came from water. Today, that might sound odd. But in Thales' time, it was groundbreaking. Water was everywhere, in rain, rivers, the sea, even in living things. It could change forms, liquid, vapor, ice. Thales wasn't just picking an element at random. He was making the first recorded attempt to find a single substance that explained the diversity of the world. What matters more than his conclusion is his method. He didn't appeal to gods or legends. He looked at the world and tried to explain it using natural causes. That's what made his thinking different. It opened the door to asking deeper questions. If everything is made of one thing, what causes it to change? What rules does nature follow? Is there a pattern behind everything we see? Thales turned observation into explanation, a move that would shape science, philosophy, and every serious attempt to understand the universe for the next 2,000 years. In a world full of stories, he chose to reason. That's where philosophy took its first real step. Pythagoras. Most people hear a song and enjoy the melody. Pythagoras heard a song and found a formula. For him, music wasn't just sound. It was math in motion. Around the 6th century BCE, Pythagoras noticed something unusual while studying musical instruments. When you pluck strings of different lengths, the notes they produce follow consistent mathematical ratios. Halve the length of a string, and the pitch jumps exactly 1 octave. These weren't random coincidences. They were precise patterns. And if sound followed such rules, maybe the rest of nature did too. Pythagoras believed that numbers were more than just quantities. They were the underlying structure of reality. According to his view, the world wasn't just made of physical stuff. It was organized by invisible principles that could be expressed in numbers and proportions. Order, balance, and harmony weren't just human ideas. They were baked into the universe itself. This way of thinking extended into how he and his followers lived. The Pythagorean community treated numbers almost with spiritual reverence. They practiced strict routines, ate specific diets, and believed that personal discipline helped align the soul with the order of the cosmos. For them, living well wasn't just about behavior. It was about tuning oneself to the hidden rhythms of the world. Pythagoras moved philosophy away from asking what the world is made of and toward asking how the world is structured. He saw patterns where others saw chaos, and in doing so, he helped transform philosophy into something that could uncover order in even the most unexpected places, from the strings of a lyre to the stars overhead. Heraclitus. Some people are drawn to what feels solid and unchanging. Heraclitus wasn't one of them. He looked at the world and saw motion, not just in rivers or seasons, but in everything. For him, change wasn't a disruption, it was the rule. Heraclitus lived in Ephesus around 500 BCE and developed a view of reality that challenged common sense. At a time when many thinkers were searching for one permanent substance behind the world, he argued that nothing truly stays the same. Everything flows, everything shifts. Trying to find something fixed in nature, he thought, was like trying to hold still in a stream. But Heraclitus wasn't saying the world was chaotic. He believed that change followed patterns, that opposites depend on one another, and tension between them creates balance. Think of how day becomes night, or how a bow needs tension to function. It's not randomness, it's structure through contrast. Central to his view was the idea of the logos, a kind of rational principle that governs all things. Even though people often miss it, he believed this hidden order keeps the constant movement from becoming pure disorder. So while everything changes, it doesn't change wildly. It follows a logic, one that most people overlook. Heraclitus wasn't trying to comfort anyone. His view was challenging, even unsettling. But it forced a deeper look at reality, one that didn't hide from impermanence but tried to understand it. He showed that change isn't something to resist or fear. It's what the world is made of. In placing transformation at the center of everything, Heraclitus offered a bold alternative to the search for stability. He didn't ask what stays the same. He asked how change itself could be the answer. Parmenides. Most people trust their senses. If something moves, changes, or disappears, we believe it because we can see it. Parmenides didn't. He believed our senses were misleading, and that real understanding came only through reason. Parmenides lived in southern Italy around 500 BCE, and he made one of the most radical claims in early philosophy, that change is an illusion. According to him, reality is one, unchanging, and eternal. In other words, despite how the world appears, with its growing trees, shifting clouds, and passing time, nothing truly comes into being or fades away. To make this argument, Parmenides started with a simple idea. Something cannot come from nothing. If something exists now, it must have always existed in some form. And if change means something becoming what it wasn't before, then that something had to come from nothing, which he said is impossible. So for Parmenides, all of reality had to be one continuous, unbroken whole. This might sound abstract, but his point was serious. If we believe what our eyes and ears tell us, we end up with contradictions, things that come and go, exist, and then don't. But if we rely on reason, we discover a deeper layer, a reality that doesn't move, shift, or break apart. Parmenides saw logic as the more trustworthy path, even if it went against common experience. And while his view was hard to accept, It forced later thinkers to respond. He pushed philosophy to take reason seriously, not just as a tool for argument, but as a guide to truth. By claiming that only the unchanging is real, Parmenides challenged how we think about time, existence, and the limits of perception. He turned the spotlight away from what we see and toward how we think. Democritus. Democritus lived around the 5th century BCE and offered one of the first known theories of a universe built from fundamental building blocks. His idea was simple. All matter is made of atoms moving through empty space. Atoms can't be seen, can't be split, and don't change themselves. But by moving, combining, and rearranging, they create everything we experience. This was a major shift in thinking. Earlier philosophers had searched for a single substance, like water, air, or fire, that made up the world. Democritus took a different route. He said it's not about one element, but about countless tiny particles with different shapes and behaviors. Atoms of different types could lock together or bounce apart, depending on how they fit, like pieces in a puzzle with no visible edge. Equally important was the idea of empty space, or the void. For atoms to move and interact, there had to be gaps between them. That concept helped explain motion and change without relying on hidden forces or myths. Democritus' atomism was a bold attempt to explain the entire universe using just matter and motion. He even applied the idea to the human soul, claiming it was made of especially fine, smooth atoms. While his theory didn't catch on widely in his time, it laid the groundwork for future scientific thinking, showing that even in ancient philosophy, some were already imagining a world of invisible parts and physical laws. Confucius. When society feels chaotic, some people turn inward. Confucius looked outward, toward relationships, rituals, and the roles we play every day. For him, a good life wasn't found in isolation or abstract thinking. It was built through harmony between people. Living in China during the 6th century BCE, Confucius saw a world torn by political instability and moral decline. But instead of trying to escape it, he believed the solution was to rebuild trust and order from the ground up, starting with how people treat each other. His philosophy focused on 5 core relationships: parent and child, ruler and subject, husband and wife, elder and younger, and friend to friend. These weren't just social categories. They were the foundation of a stable society. At the heart of his thought was li, or ritual. This didn't just mean formal ceremonies. It referred to everyday actions that showed respect, like how to speak to elders or how to greet someone properly. For Confucius, rituals were the glue that kept people connected and reminded them of their place within a larger whole. Closely tied to this was ren, often translated as humaneness or kindness. It meant treating others with warmth, empathy, and a sense of shared dignity. But Confucius didn't present this as vague idealism. He believed these values had to be practiced consistently in real life. A just ruler had to be a moral example. A good citizen had to be respectful, not just obedient. His teachings weren't about grand theories. They were about shaping better people who would in turn shape a better world. Confucius believed that if each person fulfilled their role with care and integrity, society could function like a well-tuned instrument, each part distinct but working together in harmony. Laozi lived in ancient China around the 6th century BCE and is traditionally credited as the author of the Tao Te Ching, a short but influential text that became the foundation of Taoism. At the core of his philosophy is the Tao, often translated as the way. But Laozi didn't describe the Tao as a road or a rule book. It's not something you follow in a straight line. It's the natural flow of everything, the rhythm that runs through nature, people, and events, even if you can't always see it. To live well, according to Laozi, is to align with this flow. That means less forcing, less controlling, and more observing. It means acting in ways that are flexible, like water, strong not because it resists, but because it adapts. He believed that trying to dominate nature or micromanage life leads to disorder. Real strength, he said, comes from humility and stillness. Laozi also challenged the idea that more rules or ambition automatically lead to a better world. In his view, too much interference from governments, egos, or even good intentions often makes things worse. Simplicity and balance weren't just lifestyle tips. They were strategies for maintaining harmony in both personal life and society. Rather than chasing outcomes, Laozi emphasized presence, acting with awareness, not obsession. His philosophy wasn't about doing nothing. It was about doing just enough, at the right time, in the right way. By flowing with the world instead of fighting it, he offered a path that remains surprisingly practical, even today. Jaina Himsa. This principle is called ahimsa, which means non-violence. It sits at the heart of Jainism, a tradition that began in India over 2,500 years ago. For Jains, ahimsa isn't just a moral guideline. It's the foundation for how to live, act, speak, and even think. The reasoning behind this is deeply tied to the Jain view of the soul. Every living being, from humans to insects to microscopic organisms, is believed to have a soul, capable of experiencing pain and striving for liberation. Causing harm to any of these souls doesn't just hurt them, it also binds the person who causes harm with negative karma, which keeps them trapped in the cycle of rebirth. Because of this, Jain monks and nuns go to extraordinary lengths to avoid harming life. They walk barefoot to avoid stepping on insects, sweep the ground before them, and wear masks to avoid inhaling tiny organisms. Even for lay people, Jain ethics promote vegetarianism, honesty, and restraint in all forms. But ahimsa isn't about fear or perfectionism. It's about awareness, recognizing that every action has consequences and choosing the gentlest path possible. The goal isn't just to avoid violence, but to cultivate deep respect for life in all its forms. In a world where harm often feels unavoidable, Jainism offers a radically careful alternative, one built on the belief that compassion is not just admirable, but essential to freedom and inner clarity. Buddha. Everyone faces discomfort, physical pain, emotional stress, moments of loss or confusion. The Buddha didn't try to escape that reality. He started with it. Born in India around the 5th century BCE, Siddhartha Gautama, later known as the Buddha, left behind a life of luxury to understand why people suffer. What he found became the foundation of one of the most influential philosophies in history. At its core is a simple but powerful insight. Suffering is built into life, and it has causes we can understand and reduce. Buddha's philosophy begins with what are called the Four Noble Truths. First, that suffering exists. Not just dramatic pain, but also dissatisfaction, restlessness, and craving. Second, that this suffering is caused by attachment, wanting things to be a certain way, holding on to what inevitably changes. Third, that it's possible to end this suffering. And fourth, that there's a path to do it, a practical guide known as the Eightfold Path. This path isn't about blind faith or extreme denial. It's a middle way, avoiding both indulgence and harsh discipline. It includes ethical behavior, mindful awareness, and mental training, like meditation. The goal isn't to eliminate emotion or live in isolation. It's to develop a clear, steady understanding of how the mind reacts, and how to loosen the grip of craving and aversion. Buddha didn't claim to offer a perfect system for everyone. He offered a method: observe, understand, and gradually let go. Through that process, he believed it was possible to reach a state of deep peace called nirvana, not a mystical escape, but a release from the endless push and pull of desire. His approach remains one of the most practical and psychologically grounded philosophies ever developed. It doesn't promise a perfect life. It offers clarity about the one we already live. Mohists and legalists. Not every philosophy starts with abstract ideas. Some begin with a simple question: how do you hold a country together? In ancient China, two very different schools tackled that challenge head-on: the Mohists and the legalists. Mohism, founded by Mozi around the 5th century BCE, focused on fairness and practicality. While Confucians emphasized tradition and hierarchy, Mozi argued for something more universal: jian'ai, or impartial care. He believed people should treat others, even strangers, with the same concern they show family. To him, this wasn't just moral advice. It was a blueprint for peace. He thought favoritism led to conflict, and only when people practiced equal concern could society avoid war and injustice. Mohists were also highly pragmatic. They supported simple living, disliked elaborate rituals, and promoted merit, meaning people should be judged by ability, not family background. Their ideas offered a clear alternative to both aristocracy and unchecked emotion. Legalism, by contrast, took a harder approach. Legalist thinkers like Han Feizi believed that people naturally act out of self-interest. So instead of relying on virtue or moral persuasion, they argued for strict laws, clear rewards, and harsh punishments. To legalists, a stable society depended not on good intentions, but on systems that kept behavior in check. They didn't care much about individual character or abstract ideals. What mattered was obedience, order, and results. Legalism appealed to rulers trying to unify large, diverse populations quickly, and it played a major role in shaping the powerful statecraft of the Qin dynasty. Together, these two schools show how philosophy can address urgent, real-world problems. Mohists aimed for universal love and fairness. Legalists built systems that didn't expect people to be good, just predictable. Both tried in their own way to answer the same question: how do you build a society that works? Socrates. Socrates didn't write books, build schools, or claim to have the answers. Instead, he walked the streets of Athens asking questions, simple ones, sometimes annoying ones, but behind every question was a purpose: to make people think more clearly about what they believed. Living in the 5th century BCE, Socrates developed a method of conversation that turned everyday assumptions into starting points for deeper inquiry. If someone claimed to understand justice, courage, or virtue, he would ask, "What exactly do you mean by that? How do you know it's true? Can it apply in every case?" By doing this, he often revealed that people couldn't fully explain ideas they thought were obvious. This back-and-forth approach, later called the Socratic method, wasn't meant to embarrass anyone. It was designed to expose contradictions and push people toward clearer thinking. Socrates believed that true wisdom began with recognizing your own ignorance, that it's better to admit you don't know than to pretend you do. But his questions weren't just about word games. He wanted people to live examined lives, to test their beliefs, understand their values, and take responsibility for their choices. He saw philosophy not as an academic subject, but as a daily practice that shaped how you live. This made him controversial. Many saw him as disruptive, especially when he challenged political or religious norms. Eventually, he was put on trial and sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and not respecting the city's gods. Socrates never offered a finished philosophy, but he changed the way philosophy worked. He shifted the focus from explaining the cosmos to understanding the self, not by delivering truths, but by asking better questions. And that shift marked a turning point in the history of human thought. Plato didn't think the world around us was the full picture. To him, what we see, objects, people, even events, are just shadows of something deeper, more real. His big idea was that behind everyday appearances lies a realm of perfect, unchanging forms. Living in Athens during the 4th century BCE, Plato was a student of Socrates, and he expanded on his teacher's ideas by creating a more structured theory of reality. For Plato, things like beauty, justice, or a circle aren't defined by how we see them in the world, because in the world, everything is flawed or incomplete. A beautiful painting fades. A law may seem just one day and unfair the next, but the concept of beauty or justice itself, that doesn't change. He called these ideal concepts forms. They're not physical objects, but perfect models that everything else imitates. A chair in your room may look different from a chair in someone else's, but they both draw from the same abstract form of chairness. In Plato's view, we recognize patterns not because we invent them, but because our minds are somehow linked to this invisible world of forms. Plato also believed the human soul was immortal and had access to this deeper realm before being born. Learning, then, wasn't just absorbing new information, it was remembering what the soul already knew. This tied into his view of education as a process of inner discovery, not just training. He explored these ideas through dialogues, written conversations featuring characters who debate, ask questions, and build arguments. At the center of it all was the belief that truth, goodness, and knowledge aren't just opinions. They're real. But to see them clearly, we have to look beyond what's in front of us. Aristotle wanted to understand how everything worked, not just the stars or animals, but ethics, logic, language, politics, and the purpose of human life. He wasn't interested in abstract theories for their own sake. He wanted practical explanations grounded in observation. Living in ancient Greece during the 4th century BCE, Aristotle studied under Plato but took a very different approach. While Plato focused on ideal forms beyond the physical world, Aristotle focused on the world itself. He believed that knowledge starts with what we can see, touch, and experience. So instead of looking beyond nature, he looked directly at it. One of his most influential ideas was the concept of the 4 causes. According to Aristotle, to really understand something, you need to know what it's made of, its material cause, what shape or design it has, its formal cause, how it came to be, its efficient cause, and what its purpose is, its final cause. For example, a wooden table is made of wood, shaped with a certain design, built by a carpenter, and used to hold things. Each part helps explain why the table exists. He applied this kind of thinking to everything, from biology to theatre to politics. In ethics, Aristotle believed the goal of life was to achieve eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or living well. And the way to reach it wasn't through extremes, but through balance. His idea of the golden mean said that virtue lies between 2 vices, like courage being the balance between cowardice and recklessness. Aristotle saw philosophy as a toolkit for understanding the real world. By breaking things down logically and asking what they're for, he helped lay the foundation for science, logic, and a grounded approach to human purpose that still shapes how we think today. Cynics. Most people learn to play by the rules, to seek success, follow social customs, and avoid standing out too much. The Cynics didn't just ignore those rules, they rejected the entire game. Cynicism began in ancient Greece as a radical response to what its thinkers saw as a society obsessed with wealth, comfort, and reputation. The Cynics believed that the more people chased these things, the more disconnected they became from what actually matters. Their solution was simple: live according to nature and cut out anything that isn't necessary. At the center of this philosophy was self-sufficiency, the idea that you should depend on as little as possible, not just in terms of money or possessions, but also approval, praise, or social status. If those things could be taken away, the Cynics argued, then they were never stable foundations for happiness to begin with. Diogenes, the most well-known Cynic, pushed this idea to the extreme. He lived with almost nothing, owned only a few items, and slept in public spaces. His lifestyle was designed to prove a point. You don't need luxury to live well. In fact, luxury often gets in the way. Diogenes believed that many of society's rules were artificial, and that real freedom came from breaking them when they didn't serve a meaningful purpose. But cynicism wasn't just about rejection. It was about clarity. The Cynics aimed to live honestly and directly, without pretending or hiding behind social expectations. They believed virtue came not from wealth, power, or polite behavior, but from independence and authenticity. By letting go of what most people cling to, the Cynics uncovered a different kind of strength, one that didn't rely on circumstances, opinions, or rewards. It was a philosophy built not on comfort, but on courage. Epicureans. Most people think of pleasure as something loud, parties, luxury, indulgence. But for the Epicureans, true pleasure was quiet. It was peace of mind, simplicity, and the absence of pain. Epicurus, the founder of this school of thought, lived in Greece around the 4th century BCE. His philosophy was built on a straightforward idea. The goal of life is happiness, and the path to happiness is minimizing suffering. That might sound like a free pass to excess, but Epicurus didn't celebrate indulgence. In fact, he argued that the best pleasures are the ones that lead to long-term peace. He divided desires into 3 types: natural and necessary, like food and shelter; natural but unnecessary, like fancy food or luxury; and neither natural nor necessary, like fame or power. To live well, he said, you should focus on satisfying only the first category. The fewer desires you have, the easier it is to be content. The Epicureans also believed that fear was a major source of unhappiness, especially fear of death and fear of the gods. So they tackled those fears directly. They argued that death is simply the end of sensation, not something to dread, and that the gods, if they exist, are indifferent to human affairs. This helped remove the anxiety that often surrounded life's biggest uncertainties. Epicurus and his followers gathered in a garden, not a temple or lecture hall, and lived modestly, discussing philosophy and enjoying friendship. For them, a good life wasn't about chasing highs. It was about avoiding unnecessary pain, calming the mind, and finding joy in simple things. Their message was clear: if you understand your needs, face your fears, and choose wisely, You don't need much to be happy, just enough and no more. Stoicism. Some things are in your control, most things aren't. For the Stoics, that simple distinction was the foundation of a strong and peaceful life. Stoicism began in ancient Greece, but became especially popular in Rome. It was a practical philosophy, focused less on abstract theory and more on how to live with resilience. The core idea was this: if you want to live well, focus only on what you can control: your actions, your thoughts, your values. Everything else, like wealth, status, weather, or the opinions of others, should be treated with emotional distance. This doesn't mean Stoics were cold or indifferent. In fact, they believed in living actively and ethically. But they trained themselves not to depend on external outcomes. If a situation went badly, they asked, "Did I act with integrity?" If the answer was yes, then they considered the outcome irrelevant. Stoic thinkers like Epicurus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius taught that emotions like anger, fear, and envy often arise when we try to control the uncontrollable. Instead, they encouraged mental clarity, to pause, reflect, and respond with reason. This didn't mean suppressing emotions altogether, but understanding where they come from and not letting them drive decisions. They also emphasized virtue, qualities like courage, justice, wisdom, and self-control. For a Stoic, living in line with these values was the only true form of success. Everything else was secondary. In practice, Stoicism offered a kind of mental armor, not by avoiding challenges, but by changing how you interpret them. Whether facing illness, insult, or loss, the Stoic approach was to ask, what is up to me and what is not? That mindset gave people a steady framework for navigating uncertainty, pressure, and even tragedy, with strength, clarity, and purpose. Skeptics. Most people try to find answers. The skeptics made a different move. They questioned whether answers were even possible in the first place. In ancient Greece, skepticism emerged as a response to the growing number of competing philosophical schools, each claiming to know the truth about reality, ethics, or the good life. The skeptics weren't trying to create a new system. They were asking a more basic question: how can we be sure of anything? One group, known as the academic skeptics, argued that certain knowledge was simply out of reach. Another group, the Pyrrhonian skeptics, took things even further. They avoided taking any firm position at all. Their goal wasn't confusion, it was calm. They believed that suspending judgment could lead to peace of mind. This practice was called epoche, holding back from making final claims. If you hear two equally convincing arguments, the Pyrrhonian approach wasn't to choose a side, but to recognize the uncertainty and stay neutral. That may sound indecisive, but to them, it was freeing. If you stop needing to be right all the time, you stop feeling the pressure that comes with it. Skeptics didn't reject reason. They used it, carefully and critically, to examine beliefs and challenge assumptions. They often pointed out how even the most confident philosophers could fall into contradictions or rely on unprovable foundations. The idea wasn't to give up thinking. It was to keep thinking, but without rushing to conclusions. By doing this, skeptics hope to avoid the anxiety that comes from trying to lock down absolute truths. In a world full of bold claims and strong opinions, skepticism offered something rare: the ability to pause, reflect, and admit, sometimes we just don't know, and that's okay. Asoka. When most ancient rulers wanted to show their power, they built monuments or boasted about military victories. Asoka did something different. He carved messages of compassion into stone. Asoka was an Indian emperor in the 3rd century BCE, known for ruling one of the largest empires in South Asia. Early in his reign, he expanded his territory through warfare, including a brutal campaign in Kalinga. But after witnessing the destruction firsthand, he experienced a dramatic change. Instead of continuing to rule through fear, he decided to govern through ethical principles. This shift wasn't just personal, it was public. Asoka began issuing edicts, short moral instructions carved into rocks and pillars across the empire. These edicts were written in local languages and placed in areas where everyday people could read or hear them. They promoted values like non-violence, respect for all religions, kindness to animals, and fair treatment of prisoners. At the center of his message was the concept of Dhamma, a practical form of ethical living. It wasn't tied to a specific religion, though Asoka personally followed Buddhism. Instead, it was meant to guide people from all walks of life toward better conduct. Less anger, more patience, less greed, more generosity. Asoka also applied these ideas to governance. He appointed officials called Dhamma Mahamatras to spread moral education and resolve conflicts. He funded public works like hospitals, roads, and rest houses, not for prestige, but as part of his duty to serve the people. Through his edicts, Asoka showed that philosophy didn't have to stay in books or temples. It could shape laws, policies, and daily life. His vision was one of leadership grounded not in conquest, but in conscience, a rare attempt to put ethics at the center of political power. Neo-Confucian. For centuries, Confucianism focused on everyday ethics, how to treat parents, respect authority, and live with integrity. But during a time of cultural and philosophical competition, a new version emerged that aimed to do more than guide behavior. It tried to explain the entire structure of reality. This was Neo-Confucianism, a revival that blended classical Confucian thought with ideas from Taoism and Buddhism. It took root during China's Song dynasty around the 11th and 12th centuries and gave Confucianism a new intellectual depth. At the center of this movement was the philosopher Zhu Xi, who reshaped how Confucian ideas were studied, taught, and understood. Zhu Xi introduced two key concepts, Li and Qi. Li referred to the underlying principle or pattern that gives form and order to everything, from human relationships to natural phenomena. Qi was the material force or energy that fills the universe. Every object, every person, every action is a combination of these two. Li is like the blueprint, and Qi is the substance that brings it to life. What made this view powerful was its scale. It connected moral development with the structure of the cosmos. To study ethics wasn't just about being a good person. It was about aligning with the deep patterns of the world. Neo-Confucians believed that cultivating virtue through study, reflection, and ritual was a way to understand not just society, but existence itself. This approach turned Confucianism into a complete worldview, one that could compete with the metaphysical claims of Buddhism and the spiritual flow of Taoism. It became the backbone of education and civil service in East Asia for centuries, influencing how millions of people understood not just right and wrong, but the nature of reality itself. Plotinus. Most philosophies try to explain the world around us. Plotinus focused on something else, the source behind it all. Living in the 3rd century CE, Plotinus developed a system of thought known as Neoplatonism. It was inspired by Plato, but expanded into a much broader view of reality. At the center of his philosophy is a single principle, the One. According to Plotinus, the One is not a god in the usual sense. It has no shape, personality, or desires. It's beyond categories. It's the absolute source of everything. From the one flows everything else in a kind of cascade. First comes nous, or divine intellect, the realm of perfect ideas and rational structure. From nous emerges the world's soul, which connects the higher realities to the changing physical world we live in. This process isn't something the one decides to do. It happens naturally, like light radiating from a flame. For Plotinus, our everyday world is the farthest point from that original source. It's full of change, conflict, and limitation. But the soul, he believed, comes from a higher place. So philosophy, for him, wasn't just about thinking clearly. It was about returning to that higher origin. This ascent involved inner discipline, self-reflection, and turning away from material distractions. Plotinus didn't see reality as a puzzle to be solved, but as a hierarchy to be understood from within. The more we align ourselves with truth and goodness, the closer we move toward the one, not through belief or ritual, but through quiet insight and personal transformation. His ideas shaped centuries of religious and philosophical thought, blending metaphysics with spirituality in a way that offered a full map, from the most abstract principle to the human mind trying to understand it. Augustine. Augustine didn't start life as a philosopher or a saint. He started as someone searching for meaning through ambition, pleasure, and ideas. What makes his philosophy stand out is that it's built on that search. Living in the late Roman Empire, Augustine combined personal experience with deep reflection on human nature, truth, and God. His most famous idea centers around the tension between two worlds: the city of man, shaped by self-interest and temporary things, and the city of God, rooted in eternal values and divine order. His goal wasn't to escape the world, but to understand what truly lasts within it. At the heart of his thinking is the concept of the restless heart, the idea that people are always longing for something more, often trying to fill that gap with status, relationships, or pleasure. For Augustine, that deep sense of longing pointed towards something beyond the physical world, a connection to God. He also wrestled with the nature of evil. Instead of seeing it as a force on its own, Augustine described evil as a lack of good, like darkness is the absence of light. This meant that evil wasn't created, but came from turning away from good. That view helped shape later discussions about free will, responsibility, and moral choice. Augustine believed that faith and reason weren't enemies. In fact, he argued that reason was strengthened by belief, that trust in something greater could make reflection deeper, not weaker. His writing blended philosophy, theology, and autobiography in a way that made complex ideas personal and emotionally honest. By grounding his ideas in everyday struggle and spiritual reflection, Augustine became one of the most influential thinkers in both religious and philosophical history, shaping how people have understood the soul, the self, and the search for meaning. Advaita Vedanta. Most philosophies try to explain how the world works. Advaita Vedanta asks a deeper question: who is the one experiencing it? Advaita Vedanta is one of the most influential schools of Indian philosophy, rooted in the ancient texts known as the Upanishads. Its core message is non-duality, that there is no real separation between the individual self and the ultimate reality. In Sanskrit, Advaita means not two. According to this view, everything, including your sense of self, is ultimately one with Brahman, the infinite, unchanging reality that underlies all existence. At first glance, The world seems full of difference. Me and you, mind and body, subject and object. But Advaita argues that this division is only how things appear, not how they truly are. The mistake, according to this philosophy, is confusing our temporary identity, our body, personality, or thoughts, with our true nature, which is pure awareness. That inner witness called Atman is not separate from Brahman. In fact, they are the same. The problem, Advaita says, is ignorance, specifically not recognizing this unity. This ignorance causes attachment, fear, and suffering. The goal isn't to escape the world, but to see it clearly. Through study, meditation, and insight, a person can dissolve the illusion of separateness and realize their identity with the whole. This realization isn't just intellectual. It's meant to transform how someone experiences life. When the boundary between self and other disappears, so does the fear of loss, the desire for control, and the feeling of isolation. Advaita Vedanta doesn't ask people to believe in something new. It invites them to question their assumptions and discover that the freedom they're looking for has been part of their own nature all along. Mahayana Buddhism. Emerging a few centuries after the Buddha's lifetime, Mahayana means great vehicle. It presented itself as a broader, more inclusive approach to enlightenment, one that aimed to carry more beings across the river of suffering. While early Buddhism focused on individual liberation, Mahayana emphasized becoming a bodhisattva, someone who seeks awakening not just for their own sake, but to help all others do the same. This shift changed both the tone and focus of Buddhist philosophy. Instead of withdrawing from the world, the bodhisattva remains engaged, motivated by compassion, and guided by wisdom. It's not about escaping suffering and leaving others behind. It's about working toward liberation for everyone, together. One of the key ideas in Mahayana is shunyata, or emptiness. This doesn't mean that nothing exists, but that all things lack a fixed, independent nature. Everything arises through conditions and relationships. A table, for example, depends on wood, a carpenter, tools, and countless other causes. The self, too, is not a separate core, but a process shaped by experience and context. Realizing this interdependence helps dissolve attachment, pride, and fear. Another hallmark of Mahayana is its vast cosmology, with multiple worlds, Buddhas, and paths, and its use of accessible teachings like parables and poetry to reach a wider audience. At its heart, Mahayana is still rooted in the Buddha's original insight, that suffering has causes and that liberation is possible, but it reframes that journey as something shared. Awakening isn't just about inner peace, it's about lifting others with you, one step at a time. Nagarjuna didn't try to give you answers. He questioned the way you asked in the first place. Living around the 2nd century CE, Nagarjuna became one of the most influential thinkers in Mahayana Buddhism. His philosophy, often called the middle way or Madhyamaka, built on the idea of emptiness, but took it further, turning it into a precise method for breaking down assumptions. At the core of Nagarjuna's thought is shunyata, or emptiness, the idea that things don't exist independently or permanently. But he wasn't just saying that objects lack a fixed identity. He applied this logic to everything, including time, motion, the self, even cause and effect. According to Nagarjuna, if you examine anything closely enough, you'll find it doesn't hold together the way you think it does. His method worked through a technique called tetralemma, where he would take any claim and test it from 4 angles. It is not, it both is and is not, it neither is nor is not. This wasn't just wordplay. It was a way of showing that most of our ideas fall apart when we press too hard on them. not because reality is meaningless, but because our usual concepts are too rigid. Nagarjuna wasn't trying to trap people in confusion. His goal was to dissolve the fixed views that lead to suffering, including attachment to even the most subtle philosophical positions. He argued that true insight comes when we stop clinging to rigid ideas and allow things to be understood in terms of conditions, context, and change. By cutting through both extremes, eternalism on one side and nihilism on the other, Nagarjuna's middle way invited people to let go, think more clearly, and engage with life without needing to lock it into categories. Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, the House of Wisdom wasn't just a building filled with scrolls. It was a state-sponsored center for learning that brought together scholars of different languages, religions, and backgrounds. Its main goal was translation, specifically turning Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic. But it quickly became much more than that. It evolved into a hub for innovation, debate, and discovery. Philosophers like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, and later Avicenna worked to absorb and reinterpret the works of Plato, Aristotle, and others through an Islamic lens. They didn't simply copy ancient ideas. They tested them, expanded them, and integrated them into new frameworks. Logic, metaphysics, ethics, and medicine were all reshaped in the process. Mathematicians developed algebra. Astronomers charted the stars with greater accuracy. Physicians compiled medical encyclopedias. But what made the House of Wisdom unique wasn't just its output. It was the idea behind it. That knowledge from any culture could be valuable if approached with curiosity and rigor. This was philosophy not as a school of thought, but as a shared conversation across centuries and civilizations. It encouraged critical thinking, dialogue between faith and reason, and an openness to the unfamiliar. It showed that intellectual progress doesn't come from shutting ideas out. It comes from bringing them in, translating them, and letting them challenge what you already know. The House of Wisdom wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about creating a future where philosophy and science could grow, together and for everyone. Avicenna. Avicenna wasn't just a philosopher. He was also a physician, scientist, and logician. But at the heart of all his work was one big question. What does it mean for something to exist? Living around the 10th and 11th centuries in what is now Iran, Avicenna, also known as Ibn Sina, became one of the most influential thinkers in the Islamic Golden Age. He took ideas from Greek philosophers, especially Aristotle, and reworked them into a powerful new system that shaped both Islamic and European thought for centuries. One of his key contributions was the distinction between essence and existence. Essence is what a thing is, like the idea of a tree, its structure, purpose, and characteristics. Existence is whether that thing actually is, whether it's real in the world. Avicenna argued that most things have an essence but don't necessarily exist. For example, you can imagine a unicorn. It has an essence, but it doesn't exist. From this, he developed a central idea. There must be one being whose essence and existence are identical, something that exists by necessity. This being, he argued, is the foundation of everything else. It doesn't depend on anything to exist. Everything else depends on it. This became one of the most refined arguments for the existence of God in medieval philosophy. Avicenna also applied this thinking to the soul. He famously proposed a thought experiment known as the floating man, imagining a person suspended in space without any sensory input. His point? Even without touch, sight, or sound, this person would still be aware of their own existence. For Avicenna, That meant the soul was something real and distinct from the body. By combining metaphysics, logic, and psychology, Avicenna created a deeply interconnected view of reality, one that tried to explain not just what exists, but why anything exists at all. Al-Ghazali. Not all knowledge can be worked out on a chalkboard. Al-Ghazali made that point clear, and it changed the direction of Islamic philosophy. Living in the 11th century, Al-Ghazali was a brilliant theologian and philosopher in the Islamic world. At first, he embraced rational philosophy, studying the works of thinkers like Avicenna, who used reason to explore questions about the universe, the soul, and God. But over time, Al-Ghazali began to question whether pure reason could really lead to ultimate truth. His most famous work, The Incoherence of the Philosophers, directly challenged the idea that logic and reason alone could explain everything. He argued that certain philosophical claims, especially those about eternity, causality, and the nature of God, went beyond what reason could reliably handle. One of his boldest critiques was against the principle of cause and effect. Philosophers had claimed that when one event follows another, like fire burning paper, it's because of a necessary connection. Al-Ghazali disagreed. He said we only see patterns, not necessity. Fire doesn't have to burn paper. It usually does, because that's how God chooses to order the world. But it's not an automatic law built into nature. This shifted the idea of causality from being mechanical to being contingent on divine will. Al-Ghazali didn't reject reason altogether. He saw it as useful, especially in fields like law or logic. But when it came to deeper spiritual truths, he believed reason had limits. Faith, experience, and inner reflection, he said, were essential for truly understanding the nature of existence. By drawing a line between what reason could explain and what it couldn't, Al-Ghazali reshaped how people approached philosophy, theology, and science, influencing centuries of thought, both in the Islamic world and beyond. Averroes. In a time when religion and philosophy often clashed, Averroes argued they didn't have to be enemies. They could work together. Averroes, also known as Ibn Rushd, lived in 12th century Spain during a period of intense cultural exchange between Muslim, Jewish, and Christian thinkers. He was a judge, physician, and philosopher who believed deeply in the power of reason. His most important work focused on how to read ancient philosophy, especially Aristotle, through the lens of Islamic thought. At the center of Averroes' philosophy was the idea that truth is not divided. He believed that both faith and reason lead to the same ultimate reality, even if they use different methods to get there. Religious teachings, he argued, often communicate through stories and metaphors designed for wide audiences. Philosophy, on the other hand, uses logic and careful argument, but both can be valid paths to understanding. He defended philosophy against critics like Al-Ghazali, who warned that relying too much on reason could lead people away from spiritual truth. Averroes responded by saying that philosophy wasn't a threat to religion. It was a tool that could clarify and support it. He believed that those capable of philosophical reasoning had a responsibility to explore it fully, without fear of contradiction. Averroes also revived interest in Aristotle's work, writing detailed commentaries that became essential texts in both the Islamic world and later in Europe. Through translations, his ideas had a huge impact on Christian thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and helped spark the intellectual movement that became known as Scholasticism. By insisting that faith and reason could complement each other, Averroes opened a path for dialogue, one where belief didn't require abandoning logic, and philosophy didn't mean turning away from spiritual meaning. Maimonides, born in the 12th century in Spain and later settling in Egypt. Moses. Maimonides was a towering figure in Jewish philosophy. He was a physician, a legal scholar, and a philosopher, best known for his work, The Guide for the Perplexed. In it, he tackled a major challenge: how to reconcile religious belief with the philosophical ideas of thinkers like Aristotle. One of Maimonides' key ideas was that not all parts of religious texts should be taken literally. When scripture seems to conflict with reason, like descriptions of God having human features or emotions, Maimonides argued these are metaphorical. The purpose of such language, he explained, is to help people understand deep truths in a way that fits their level of knowledge. But for those capable of deeper reasoning, philosophy offers a more accurate view of the divine. Central to his thinking was the idea that God is beyond human categories. We can't truly describe what God is. We can only say what God is not. This approach, known as negative theology, helped preserve the mystery of the divine while maintaining intellectual integrity. Maimonides also emphasized that developing the intellect and living ethically were essential to spiritual growth. He believed that studying science, logic, and ethics wasn't a distraction from religion. It was part of fulfilling one's religious duty. His ideas weren't always popular. Some religious authorities found his philosophical approach too abstract, but over time, his influence grew, not just in Judaism, but also in Christian and Islamic thought. Maimonides offered a model where belief didn't require blind acceptance and reason didn't mean abandoning tradition, a careful balance that continues to resonate in debates about faith and knowledge today. Scholastic disputes. In medieval Europe, learning didn't happen through quiet reading, it happened through debate. And at the center of that tradition were the scholastic disputes, rigorous, rule-based arguments where philosophy, theology, and logic collided in search of clarity. Scholasticism was the dominant intellectual method in European universities between the 12th and 17th centuries. It wasn't a specific doctrine, but a way of thinking. Scholars used it to explore big questions, like the nature of God, the meaning of justice, or the relationship between faith and reason. What made it unique was the structure. Arguments had to be clear, precise, and well supported by logic and authoritative texts, especially those of Aristotle and early church fathers. A typical scholastic dispute began with a question, something like, "Can humans know God's essence?" The scholar would then list arguments for and against, sometimes quoting opposing views in detail. Only after exploring all sides would they offer a reasoned conclusion. This back and forth wasn't just academic. It was a training ground for thinking through complexity without rushing to judgment. These debates often took place in public forums. Professors, students, and even audiences would participate. The goal wasn't to win, but to sharpen reasoning and clarify tough ideas. Over time, this method became so refined that it shaped the entire curriculum of medieval universities. Scholastic disputes weren't just about religion. They laid the foundation for law, ethics, science, and education. The precision, structure, and intellectual discipline demanded by the method helped preserve and transmit knowledge during a time when Europe was rebuilding its institutions of learning. By turning disagreement into a disciplined craft, scholasticism helped transform argument into a tool, not for conflict, but for progress, and influence the way knowledge would be pursued for centuries to come. Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas believed that faith and reason weren't separate roads. They were two lanes on the same path. Living in the 13th century, Aquinas was a Dominican friar and philosopher who became one of the most influential figures in Christian thought. His big project was to bring together two worlds, the teachings of the Church and the logic-heavy philosophy of Aristotle. Instead of seeing them in conflict, he argued that they could actually strengthen one another. At the center of Aquinas' philosophy is the idea that truth is unified. If something is true in science or logic, and something is true in faith, they must ultimately be part of the same reality. He used this belief to build a structured system of thought that explained everything from ethics and politics to the nature of God and the soul. One of his most well-known contributions is the 5 Ways, 5 logical arguments for the existence of God. These weren't based on scripture or personal experience, but on observation and reason. For example, one of them looks at motion. Things move because something else moved them. Follow that chain back far enough, he argued, and you arrive at a first mover, something that starts the process but isn't moved by anything else. Aquinas also believed that human beings are rational by nature, and that we can use our reason to understand natural law, a built-in sense of right and wrong that comes from our very design. This view laid the groundwork for many ideas in Western legal and moral philosophy. By combining detailed reasoning with spiritual belief, Aquinas helped shape not only religious thinking, but the structure of education and debate in Europe. His work bridged faith and logic in a way that still influences how we think today. William of Ockham. Sometimes the best answer is the simplest one. That's the idea behind William of Ockham's most famous contribution to philosophy, a principle now known as Ockham's razor. William of Ockham was a 14th century English philosopher and theologian. He lived during a time when thinkers were building elaborate systems to explain everything from nature to divine mysteries. Ockham thought many of these explanations were overcomplicated, and that piling on assumptions didn't bring us closer to the truth. His solution was straightforward. When faced with multiple explanations, the one that makes the fewest unnecessary assumptions is usually the best. This doesn't mean that the simplest explanation is always correct, just that you shouldn't add complexity without a good reason. For example, if your light bulb goes out, you could say the bulb burned out. Or you could invent an elaborate theory involving ghosts and energy waves. Occam's razor cuts through the second idea. Unless you have strong evidence for something extra, stick with what's necessary. This way of thinking became a foundational principle in science and logic. It encourages clear reasoning and forces people to justify every part of their explanation. It also helped challenge overly complex medieval theories about the universe, setting the stage for more empirical, testable approaches in later centuries. Ockham applied this thinking beyond science, to theology, language, and metaphysics. He even questioned the need for certain church doctrines if they couldn't be grounded in reason or scripture. While his views were controversial, they pushed philosophy toward greater clarity and discipline. Occam's razor isn't a tool you hold, it's a mindset, a habit of trimming away the excess to see what really holds up. And that makes it one of the most powerful ideas in the history of thought. Tibetan Buddhism. Most people think of the mind as a stream of thoughts, busy, scattered, sometimes chaotic. But Tibetan Buddhism offers a different view. Beneath all the noise, the mind is naturally clear and calm. It calls this the clear light nature of mind. This idea comes from Vajrayana, or Tibetan Buddhism, which developed a detailed understanding of consciousness and how to work with it. According to this tradition, the mind isn't fundamentally flawed or broken. Its true nature is open, luminous, and aware, like a sky behind the clouds. Thoughts and emotions may come and go, but the basic nature of awareness remains steady and untouched. The clear light is not a mystical glow. It refers to a deep, subtle level of consciousness that becomes most apparent in rare moments, like deep meditation, falling asleep, or even at the moment of death. Tibetan Buddhist teachings say this pure awareness is always present, but usually hidden by mental habits, distractions, and misconceptions. Practices like meditation are designed to peel back those layers. Through careful attention and mental training, a person can begin to notice the difference between fleeting thoughts and the more stable awareness beneath them. Recognizing this clear light nature isn't just a calming experience, it's central to enlightenment in Tibetan Buddhism. The goal is not to escape the world, but to live in it with the insight that your mind is not the storm, but the space behind it. What makes this philosophy unique is its confidence in the mind's potential. Instead of viewing thoughts or emotions as problems to fix, Tibetan Buddhism teaches that clarity is already there. The task is simply learning to see it. That shift transforms not only how one views meditation, but how one understands the mind itself. Renaissance humanists. During the Middle Ages, philosophy was largely focused on the divine, how to serve God, obey the church, and prepare for the afterlife. Then came the Renaissance humanists, who asked a different question. What does it mean to be fully human, right here and now? Emerging in the 14th and 15th century Europe, Renaissance humanism was a cultural and intellectual movement that shifted the spotlight from religious authority to individual potential. Humanists weren't rejecting religion, many were deeply spiritual, but they wanted to balance it with a renewed focus on human experience, creativity, and reason. They looked to classical sources for inspiration. Thinkers like Petrarch, Erasmus, and Pico della Mirandola read ancient Greek and Roman texts, not just for historical knowledge, but for insight into ethics, politics, education, and personal growth. They believed that studying the humanities, subjects like literature, history, philosophy, and art, could develop a person's moral character and critical thinking. One major shift was how they viewed human nature. Instead of seeing people as inherently fallen or sinful, many humanists believed humans had the capacity for greatness. Education wasn't just about memorizing scripture or doctrine. It was about cultivating wisdom, eloquence, and virtue. The goal was to become a well-rounded individual who could engage with the world thoughtfully and responsibly. This new focus on the human spirit helped spark changes across society, in art, science, and politics. Artists began to study anatomy and perspective to better represent the human form. Writers explored individual identity and emotion. Thinkers began to question traditional authority and promote civic responsibility. By turning their attention to the richness of human life, Renaissance humanists redefined what it meant to think philosophically, making it not only about the divine, but about the depth and dignity of the human experience. Machiavelli. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't write about how the world should work, he wrote about how it does. Living in Renaissance Italy, a time of political intrigue, betrayal, and constant power struggles, Machiavelli watched leaders rise and fall, often not because they were good or just, but because they were clever, ruthless, or simply lucky. His most famous book, The Prince, is not a moral guidebook. It's a manual for survival in the real world of politics. Machiavelli argued that rulers shouldn't rely on idealism. Instead, they should focus on what actually works. If being honest and kind helps keep power, great. But if lying, manipulating, or even using violence is more effective, then that's what a ruler should do. He believed that political stability was more important than personal virtue. One of his key ideas was the separation of ethics from politics. He wasn't saying that morality didn't matter, but that political decisions had to be judged by their results, not by their intentions. A leader might need to make unpopular or even cruel choices if it meant protecting the state. He also introduced the idea of virtu, not virtue in the moral sense, but a kind of flexible, strategic intelligence. It meant knowing how to adapt, take opportunities, and act decisively. The best leaders, he thought, were those who could shape fortune to their advantage. Machiavelli's ideas were controversial from the start. To some, he sounded cynical, even dangerous. But to others, he was refreshingly honest about power and human behavior. Instead of dreaming about perfect societies, he examined the messy realities of leadership. By focusing on what people actually do, not what they claim to believe, Machiavelli laid the groundwork for modern political science. His work remains one of the boldest attempts to understand power without illusions. Reformation Thinkers. In the early 1500s, a group of thinkers sparked a movement that didn't just change religion, it redefined authority, truth, and individual responsibility. These were the Reformation thinkers, and their ideas shook the foundations of European society. At the heart of the Reformation was a challenge to the Catholic Church's control over spiritual knowledge. For centuries, the Church had been the gatekeeper of religious truth, interpreting scripture and issuing doctrine through a hierarchy of clergy. Reformers like Martin Luther, John Calvin, and others believed this structure had drifted away from the original message of Christianity, and that it was time to return to the basics. Their core idea was simple but radical. Individuals should have direct access to Scripture and to God, without needing an institution to mediate the relationship. This belief rested on the idea of conscience, that each person has the right and the responsibility to interpret spiritual truth for themselves. It wasn't about rejecting religion, it was about making it personal. Martin Luther famously translated the Bible into German so ordinary people could read it. John Calvin developed a systematic theology that emphasized discipline and self-governance. Both believed that faith must be sincere, not automatic, and that no human authority, not even the Church, should override the authority of Scripture. These ideas had ripple effects far beyond religion. They encouraged literacy, expanded education, and introduced new discussions about freedom, individual rights, and civil government. The very act of questioning long-held truths became a tool for progress. Reformation thinkers weren't just reforming a church, they were redefining how knowledge is claimed, who gets to interpret it, and how power should be held to account. In doing so, they helped pave the way for the modern idea of personal freedom grounded in conviction. Scientific revolution. For most of human history, people believed the Earth was at the center of the universe. Then came a series of thinkers who completely flipped that view, and with it, changed how we understand the world. The scientific revolution, spanning from the 1500s to the 1700s, was a period when observation and reason began to challenge long-held beliefs. It started with figures like Nicholas Copernicus, who proposed a simple but disruptive idea. The Earth revolves around the Sun. This wasn't just a shift in astronomy. It was a challenge to the way knowledge itself was justified. Instead of relying on tradition or authority, Copernicus used careful math and observation to draw new conclusions. This shift opened the door for others. Galileo Galilei used telescopes to confirm Copernicus's model, and argued that nature could be understood through mathematical laws. Johannes Kepler refined this model, showing that planets move in ellipses, not perfect circles. These discoveries gradually replaced a universe based on perfection and purpose with one based on physical laws. The revolution reached its peak with Isaac Newton. He introduced a unified theory of motion and gravity that explained everything from falling apples to planetary orbits. Newton's laws showed that the same principles applied everywhere. Earth and sky followed the same rules. It was the first time the universe seemed knowable through a single, consistent system. This wasn't just a leap in science, it was a transformation in philosophy. It redefined knowledge as something testable, observable, and repeatable. It shifted authority from ancient texts to experiments and evidence. And it laid the foundation for modern science, not as a set of facts, but as a method for understanding reality through careful reasoning and proof. Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon believed that progress didn't come from guessing. It came from testing. Living in the late 1500s and early 1600s, Bacon watched as Europe began shifting away from medieval traditions and toward new ways of thinking about the natural world. But he noticed something was missing. A clear method for discovering reliable knowledge. So he set out to build one. Bacon's key idea was what we now call the scientific method. Instead of relying on abstract reasoning or ancient texts, he argued that knowledge should come from systematic observation and experiment. His process started with careful collection of data, real-world facts gathered through experience. From there, general principles could be formed by looking for patterns, not assumed through guesswork or tradition. He called this approach inductive reasoning. Unlike deduction, which starts with a big idea and tries to apply it downward, induction builds understanding from the ground up, beginning with specific examples and working toward broader conclusions. This meant science wasn't just about thinking harder, but about watching more closely. Bacon also warned against common mental errors he called idols, built-in biases that cloud judgment. These included things like favoring familiar ideas, trusting authorities too quickly, or stretching the facts to fit personal beliefs. His goal was to clear away these obstacles so that knowledge could be based on reality, not assumption. While Bacon wasn't a scientist in the modern sense, his vision helped define the mindset that drives science today. He treated discovery as a disciplined process, one anyone could follow if they asked the right questions and gathered real evidence. By turning knowledge into a method, Francis Bacon helped move philosophy out of the library and into the lab, reshaping how we explore, test, and understand the world. Descartes, René Descartes, started with doubt, not as a problem, but as a method. Living in the early 1600s, Descartes saw a world full of uncertain knowledge. Old authorities were being questioned, and new scientific discoveries were reshaping how people understood nature. Descartes wanted to build a foundation for knowledge that couldn't be shaken. So he asked a bold question. What, if anything, can I know for certain? To find out, he stripped everything away. Beliefs, assumptions, even the evidence of the senses. If something could be doubted, he set it aside. And eventually, he landed on one thing he couldn't doubt, the fact that he was thinking. Even if everything else was an illusion, the act of thinking proved there was a thinker. This led to his most famous idea. I think, therefore I am. From there, Descartes worked to rebuild knowledge step by step, starting from this basic certainty. He argued that reason, not experience alone, was the most reliable path to truth. His approach is called rationalism, the belief that clear, logical thinking can reveal the structure of reality. Descartes also introduced the idea of mind-body dualism. He believed the mind and body were two different kinds of substances. The mind was non-material and responsible for thought, while the body was physical and followed mechanical laws. This separation helped shape debates in philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience for centuries. His ideas laid the groundwork for modern philosophy by shifting the focus inward, not just studying the world, but asking how we know what we know. Descartes didn't try to answer every question. He tried to show how to ask them in a way that started from clarity, not confusion, building a system of knowledge on a foundation of doubt. Spinoza. Baruch Spinoza saw something most people kept separate: nature, reason, and God, and argued that they were all the same thing. Living in the 17th century, Spinoza was a Dutch philosopher who took the big questions of his time about religion, science, and reality, and offered a radically unified answer. His central idea was that everything in existence is part of one single substance. This substance isn't a distant personal God or a collection of separate things. It's one infinite, interconnected reality. He called it God or nature, not two things, but two ways of talking about the same thing. In Spinoza's view, God isn't outside the universe, intervening in events. God is the universe. Every tree, every thought, every planet, and every law of physics is a part of this one substance expressing itself in different ways. The mind and the body, for example, are not separate. They're just two aspects of the same underlying thing. This idea challenged both religious and philosophical norms. Many people believed God was a creator separate from creation. Spinoza rejected that view. He believed the divine is not above or beyond nature. It is nature. To understand the world rationally, through science and logic, was to understand God more deeply. Spinoza also believed that freedom didn't mean doing whatever you want. True freedom came from understanding necessity, seeing how everything follows from the laws of nature, and aligning your life with that understanding. The more clearly you grasp how things work, the more power you have over your own emotions and decisions. Spinoza's philosophy offered a new way of seeing the world, not as a collection of parts or competing forces, but as a single, rational, and divine whole, endlessly unfolding and fully knowable through reason. Thomas Hobbes looked at human nature and saw one thing clearly. Without rules, things fall apart. Living through the chaos of the English Civil War in the 1600s, Hobbes didn't take peace or stability for granted. He wanted to understand what holds societies together and what happens when they break down. His answer became one of the most influential political ideas in Western philosophy. Hobbes believed that in a state of nature, where there's no government or authority, people are driven by self-preservation. Everyone has the right to do whatever they think is necessary to survive, which sounds fair until you realize it creates constant fear and conflict. No one can feel safe, and life becomes, in Hobbes's words, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. To escape that, Hobbes said people must agree to give up some freedom and hand power to a central authority, a government strong enough to keep order. He called this agreement a social contract. The government, or sovereign, doesn't get its power from divine right or tradition, but from the consent of the people, who choose order over chaos. Importantly, Hobbes didn't think the ruler had to be democratic. In fact, he believed that a powerful, even absolute authority was necessary to prevent society from collapsing back into disorder. To him, stability mattered more than individual rights. This idea became the foundation for later political theories about the role of government, authority, and civil society. Hobbes helped shift the focus from ideal rulers to real-world systems, and from religious authority to human agreement. By grounding politics in human behavior and mutual agreement, Hobbes gave us a new way to think about power, not as something inherited or imposed, but as something we build to protect ourselves from ourselves. Locke. John Locke saw freedom not as chaos, but as a right, something every person is born with, and something no government should take away without good reason. Living in 17th century England during a time of political upheaval, Locke set out to rethink the relationship between the individual and the state. His philosophy became a cornerstone of liberal political thought, influencing everything from modern democracies to human rights. At the heart of Locke's thinking is the idea of natural rights. He argued that all people are born with certain basic rights: life, liberty, and property, simply by being human. These aren't given by governments or rulers. They exist before any laws are written. The job of government is not to grant these rights, but to protect them. Like Hobbes, Locke believed in a social contract, the idea that people agree to form a government for mutual benefit. But unlike Hobbes, Locke didn't think this meant giving absolute power to a ruler. If a government fails to protect people's rights, Locke believed the people have the right to change or overthrow it. Locke also made important contributions to our understanding of knowledge. He argued that the mind begins as a blank slate, a tabula rasa, and that all knowledge comes from experience. This view challenged the idea that we're born with built-in ideas or truths, and laid the groundwork for modern theories of learning and psychology. His work shaped the American and French revolutions and helped build the foundation for constitutional government, individual liberty, and the rule of law. Locke's vision was clear. Governments should serve the people, not the other way around, and a free society is one where personal rights are protected by reason, not just power. Leibniz. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was a philosopher who believed the universe wasn't just organized, it was perfectly designed. Living in the 17th century, Leibniz was a true polymath, a mathematician, scientist, diplomat, and philosopher. He co-invented calculus, but his philosophical work reached even further. He wanted to explain not just how the world works, but why it exists in the first place, and why it's the way it is. Leibniz's most famous idea is that we live in the best of all possible worlds. This doesn't mean everything is perfect or free from suffering. Instead, he believed that, out of all the logically possible ways the world could have been, this version balances complexity, variety, and order in the most rational way. In other words, if a better world could have existed, it would have. To support this, Leibniz introduced the idea of monads. Monads are the basic units of reality, not particles in a physical sense, but tiny, indivisible points of force or perception. Each monad is like a self-contained mirror of the universe, expressing a unique point of view. These monads don't interact directly, but unfold according to a pre-established harmony, a kind of cosmic coordination that ensures everything fits together without needing physical cause and effect between the parts. This model allowed Leibniz to defend both scientific discovery and religious faith. He believed that reason and logic could reveal a divine order beneath all things. Even events that seem random or tragic are part of a broader, rational plan that we may not fully understand. Leibniz's vision was both optimistic and structured. He imagined a universe where every detail plays a role in a system designed with intelligence and purpose. A world that makes sense, even if we're still learning how to see it clearly. Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft looked at a society that praised reason and liberty, but excluded half the population from both. Living in 18th century England during the Enlightenment, Wollstonecraft saw a contradiction. Philosophers were calling for freedom, equality, and education, yet women were still expected to be passive, obedient, and dependent. Her response was direct and groundbreaking. If reason is a human trait, then women deserve the same rights and education as men. Her most influential work, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, argued that women are not naturally inferior to men. They only appear that way because they've been denied equal opportunities to learn and think for themselves. She believed that education was the foundation of equality. Without it, women were raised to focus only on beauty, marriage, and pleasing others, not because they lacked ability, but because they were taught to. Wollstonecraft wasn't just asking for sympathy, she was making a rational case. A just society cannot ignore the intellect and potential of half its citizens. She wanted women to be respected as rational beings, capable of making their own decisions and contributing to society beyond domestic roles. Her vision included more than individual freedom. She believed that giving women equal education and rights would strengthen families, improve public life, and create a more moral and stable society. She connected private life with public good, showing how inequality at home affected the entire structure of society. Wollstonecraft's ideas planted the early seeds of modern feminism. By challenging the deep-rooted belief that women's roles were fixed by nature, she redefined what it meant to be equal, not just in law, but in mind, dignity, and potential. Her philosophy asked for more than fairness. It called for a full recognition of women as thinking, reasoning individuals. Berkeley. George Berkeley took a bold position that still surprises people today. Physical objects don't exist independently of our minds. In his view, to be is to be perceived. Living in the early 1700s, Berkeley was a philosopher and Anglican bishop who pushed back against the growing materialism of his time. Many thinkers believed that the world was made of physical matter and that our senses simply detected it. Berkeley disagreed. He argued that what we call matter doesn't exist outside of our perception. Everything we experience, a tree, a table, a cup, only exists because it is being perceived by a mind. This idea is known as immaterialism or idealism. Berkeley believed that all objects are collections of sensations, color, shape, texture, and those sensations only exist in minds. If no one is looking at the tree, is it still there? According to Berkeley, yes, because it is always perceived by an ultimate mind, God. God's constant awareness ensures that the world remains stable, even when no human is watching. To Berkeley, this wasn't just a mental exercise. He believed that grounding reality in perception helped protect religious belief against skepticism. If the physical world depends on God's perception, then its existence is a reflection of divine presence, not blind material forces. Critics found his ideas hard to accept. After all, we live as though there's a solid world out there, independent of us. But Berkeley's philosophy forced a deeper question. How much of what we call real depends on how we experience it? By turning attention away from matter and toward the role of perception, Berkeley offered a radical rethinking of reality, one where mind, not material, is at the core of everything we know. Hume. David Hume didn't try to prove what we believe. He tried to understand why we believe it. Living in 18th century Scotland, Hume became one of the most influential figures of the Enlightenment. But while many philosophers were building systems of reason and certainty, Hume took a different route. He questioned the very foundations of knowledge, especially how we come to trust things like cause and effect, identity, and even our sense of self. Hume believed that all knowledge comes from experience. Everything we know, he said, starts with impressions, the vivid, immediate data from our senses. From those, we build ideas, which are just memories or reflections of those impressions. But when we look closer, Hume argued, many of our big beliefs don't actually come from direct experience. Take causality, for example. We assume that when one thing happens, like a cue ball hitting another, it causes the next event. But all we really observe is one thing followed by another. The connection between them. That's something we infer based on habit. We expect the future to resemble the past because that's what we've seen before, not because we have logical proof that it must. Hume applied this same skepticism to the self. We talk about being the same person over time, but if we look closely, all we really experience is a stream of sensations, thoughts, and memories. The idea of a fixed self, tying it all together, is just a mental shortcut. His work shook the confidence of philosophers who believed in reason's power to explain everything. Yet Hume wasn't trying to destroy knowledge. He wanted to ground it in human psychology. By exploring the limits of reason, he helped launch a new way of thinking, one that put human experience, not certainty, at the center of philosophy. Bentham and Mill. What makes an action right or wrong? For Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, the answer was simple. It depends on how much happiness it produces. Bentham and Mill were the key figures behind utilitarianism, a moral philosophy that evaluates actions based on their consequences. Instead of focusing on duty, tradition, or divine command, they asked a more practical question. Does this action increase overall well-being? Jeremy Bentham, writing in the late 18th century, introduced the core idea. He believed that the best action is the one that brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. Happiness in this case meant pleasure and the absence of pain. Bentham even imagined a kind of moral calculator, weighing the intensity, duration, and number of people affected by each outcome. John Stuart Mill, writing a generation later, refined Bentham's view. He agreed with the goal of maximizing happiness, but argued that not all pleasures are equal. Mill believed that intellectual and moral pleasures, like reading, learning, or helping others, are more valuable than simple physical pleasures. For Mill, the quality of happiness mattered, not just the quantity. Utilitarianism became a powerful tool for thinking about ethics, policy, and justice. It supported ideas like democracy, animal rights, and prison reform, because these things, on balance, tend to increase well-being. But it also raised tough questions, like how to measure happiness, how to balance individual rights with collective outcomes, and whether the ends always justify the means. By shifting the focus to outcomes and aiming for the greatest good, Bentham and Mill turned ethics into a public discussion, one grounded in logic, empathy, and everyday impact. Their work laid the foundation for modern debates on law, economics, and the role of morality in social decision-making. Immanuel Kant believed that morality wasn't about what happens. It was about what should happen. Living in 18th century Prussia, Kant set out to answer a difficult question. How can we know what's right and wrong, regardless of the situation or outcome. Many philosophers before him focused on consequences, like maximizing happiness, but Kant believed that morality had to come from something more consistent, reason itself. His central idea was called the categorical imperative, a rule that applies universally, no matter who you are or what you want. One version of it says, act only according to principles you could will everyone else to follow. For example, if you lie to get ahead, you'd be supporting a world where lying is acceptable for everyone. But in a world where no one trusts each other, lying stops working, so your action fails its own test. Kant also believed that people should never be treated as mere tools to achieve a goal. Every person, he argued, has inherent worth simply because they are capable of reason and choice. That means using someone purely for personal gain, even if it helps others, is morally wrong. In terms of knowledge, Kant made another big contribution. He argued that we don't just passively receive information from the world. Instead, our minds actively shape how we experience it. Time, space, and cause and effect aren't things we observe out there. They're structures our minds use to make sense of reality. Kant's philosophy tried to draw clear boundaries between what we can know, what we should do, and what we can hope for. By grounding ethics in reason and respect for others, he laid the foundation for modern ideas of justice, human rights, and the dignity of the individual. German idealists. After Kant rewired how we think about knowledge and morality, a group of German philosophers took his ideas and ran with them, deep into the nature of reality, freedom, and the self. These were the German idealists, a movement that began in the late 18th and early 19th centuries with thinkers like Johann Gottlieb Fichte, Friedrich Schelling, and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Their core idea was bold. Reality isn't something separate from us. It's shaped by the mind, by reason, and ultimately by consciousness itself. They built on Kant's insight that we don't just observe the world, we help structure it through our concepts of time, space, and causality. But while Kant drew a line between how we experience things and what may lie beyond our perception, the idealists wanted to close that gap. They argued that reality and mind are not separate at all. Everything we call real is connected to the development of thought. Fichte, for example, saw the self as active, constantly defining itself by resisting what is not self. For him, freedom wasn't just doing what you want, but creating your own identity through effort and reflection. Schelling focused on nature, suggesting that it wasn't a dead mechanism, but a living, dynamic expression of the same force behind human thought. He aimed to unify nature and spirit as two sides of the same process. Then came Hegel, who saw history itself as the evolution of consciousness. Through a process of conflict and resolution, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, human societies, ideas, and values gradually move toward greater freedom and self-understanding. German idealism wasn't just a theory about thought. It was a sweeping attempt to show that everything, from logic and art to politics and science, unfolds from a single, unified reality shaped by the development of mind. Hegel. Georg Wilhelm. Friedrich Hegel believed that truth doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds over time. Living in early 19th century Germany, Hegel developed one of the most ambitious systems of philosophy ever attempted. His goal was to understand how ideas, history, and human consciousness evolve, not in a straight line, but through a dynamic process of change, contradiction, and resolution. At the core of Hegel's philosophy is dialectic, the idea that development happens through conflict. You start with a position or idea, the thesis, which runs into its opposite, the antithesis. The clash between them doesn't end in a winner. It leads to a new understanding that includes parts of both sides, the synthesis. This new synthesis then becomes the next thesis, and the cycle continues. Hegel believed this process drives everything from individual thought to world history. Human societies, he argued, don't just shift randomly. They move toward greater awareness, freedom, and rational organization, even if the path is messy and full of struggle. For Hegel, even conflict is part of progress. One of his key contributions was the idea that history itself has a logic, that it's not just a series of events, but a rational process through which the human spirit comes to understand itself. This isn't just political or social change. It's the evolution of consciousness and values over time. Hegel also saw reality as deeply interconnected. Nothing makes sense in isolation. Everything gains meaning through its role in a broader system. So rather than reducing truth to a single point of view, Hegel tried to show how multiple perspectives, even opposing ones, could be part of a larger, unfolding picture. His philosophy reshaped how people understood change, history, and the development of ideas, not as fixed answers, but as living, evolving processes. Romantic nature philosophy. At a time when science was slicing nature into parts, Romantic philosophers were trying to put it back together. Romantic nature philosophy emerged in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, mainly in Germany, as a response to the cold, mechanical view of the world promoted by Enlightenment thinking. Instead of seeing nature as a lifeless machine governed only by formulas and forces, Romantic thinkers saw it as alive, creative, and deeply interconnected with the human spirit. Philosophers like Friedrich Schelling believed that nature wasn't something outside of us. It was part of the same reality that gave rise to human thought. In fact, they argued that nature itself was striving toward consciousness, and that human beings were nature becoming aware of itself. This wasn't just abstract speculation. Romantic philosophers looked at natural phenomena, like the growth of a plant or the development of a species, and saw purpose, direction, and self-organization. Nature to them wasn't passive or accidental. It was expressive, dynamic, and evolving in ways that mirrored the development of the mind. They also pushed back against the idea that science had to be detached and objective. They believed that emotion, intuition, and imagination were essential tools for understanding nature, not just microscopes and equations. The goal wasn't just to explain how nature works, but to feel what it means to be part of it. Romantic nature philosophy helped bridge science, art, and spirituality. It influenced poets, painters, and scientists alike, inspiring a view of the natural world that was both intellectually curious and emotionally rich. By reconnecting reason with wonder, the Romantics offered a vision of nature that wasn't just knowable, it was meaningful, alive, and deeply human. Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer looked at life and didn't sugarcoat it. Where others saw progress and purpose, he saw struggle, a restless force driving everything, often without direction or relief. Living in the 19th century, Schopenhauer built on the ideas of Kant and Eastern philosophy, especially Buddhism and Hinduism. His core idea was that the world we experience is shaped by a blind, irrational force he called will. This will isn't personal or conscious. It's the raw drive behind all existence. It pushes animals to survive, humans to desire, and nature to keep moving, not because it leads somewhere, but because it simply can't stop. To Schopenhauer, this will is the root of suffering. We're constantly wanting, striving, needing. And even when we get what we want, it never feels like enough. The moment one desire is fulfilled, another takes its place. Pleasure is brief, frustration is constant, and the cycle goes on. But Schopenhauer didn't think we were powerless. He believed we could find relief through moments of escape, especially through art, music, and deep contemplation. These moments allow us to step outside the endless pull of desire, even if only temporarily. He also admired ascetic lifestyles, people who turned away from worldly pleasures to find peace through simplicity and self-discipline. He had a famously pessimistic view of human nature, but that didn't mean he rejected kindness or compassion. In fact, he saw compassion as one of the few ways people could truly connect, recognizing suffering in others and acting to ease it. Schopenhauer's ideas didn't offer easy answers, but they spoke directly to the difficulties of being human. By facing suffering honestly and finding value in stillness and empathy, he offered a philosophy that was raw, realistic, and unexpectedly consoling. Kierkegaard. Søren Kierkegaard believed that the hardest decisions in life aren't about facts, they're about who we choose to become. Living in 19th century Denmark, Kierkegaard stood out from the dominant philosophies of his time. While others were trying to build systems of reason and logic, he focused on something messier and more personal, the inner life of the individual. His work laid the foundation for what would later be called existentialism. Kierkegaard argued that real philosophy doesn't start with abstract ideas. It starts with anxiety, doubt, and choice. Human beings, he believed, are not just rational thinkers. We are emotional, uncertain, and faced with decisions that logic alone can't solve. For him, one of the defining features of life is angst, a kind of deep, unsettling awareness that we are free to choose, but never fully sure what the right choice is. This leads to what he called the leap of faith. For Kierkegaard, belief, especially religious belief, isn't about evidence or proof. It's about making a personal, risky commitment in the face of uncertainty. You don't wait until you're certain to act. You act in spite of not being certain. That leap defines a meaningful life. He also explored the idea of living authentically. According to Kierkegaard, most people live in what he called the aesthetic stage, chasing pleasure, distractions, and social approval. But true selfhood requires moving into the ethical and eventually the religious stages, where you face your own responsibilities and make choices with deep personal commitment. Kierkegaard didn't offer a system of answers. Instead, he gave voice to the struggle of being human, a struggle filled with anxiety, doubt, and the need to decide what matters most, even when no one else can decide it for you. Marx. Karl Marx looked at the world and saw a pattern. History was being driven by conflict, not between nations or ideas, but between classes. Living in the 19th century, Marx developed a powerful critique of capitalism. He believed that the economic system wasn't just a way of organizing goods and services. It was a force that shaped everything from politics to culture to human relationships. At the core of his theory was the idea that society is divided into two main groups: those who own the means of production, factories, land, tools, and those who sell their labor to survive. Marx called these groups the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie controls capital and profits from the work of others. The proletariat, or working class, depends on selling their labor in exchange for wages. But Marx believed that this relationship wasn't fair. It was exploitative. Workers produce value, but that value is taken by the owners as profit. This leads to what Marx called alienation. In a capitalist system, workers don't own what they create. They often have no say in how they work, what they produce, or what the result means. Over time, this disconnect leads people to feel powerless and disconnected, not just from their labor, but from themselves and each other. Marx argued that this system wouldn't last forever. He believed that capitalism carried the seeds of its own collapse, that as inequality and exploitation grew, workers would eventually organize, demand change, and replace it with a more just and collective system. For Marx, philosophy wasn't about interpreting the world from a distance. It was about understanding it so people could change it. His ideas went on to influence politics, economics, and social theory, sparking debates that still shape the modern world. John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill believed that freedom wasn't just about avoiding interference, it was about becoming your best self. Writing in the 19th century, Mill was deeply concerned with how individuals could live meaningful lives in an increasingly modern, structured society. He supported liberty, but not in a vague or abstract way. For Mill, liberty meant allowing people the space to think, speak, and act without being restricted by governments or social pressure, as long as they didn't harm others. This became the foundation of his famous harm principle. Mill argued that the only reason society should limit someone's freedom is to prevent harm to others. Annoyance, disagreement, or offense weren't good enough reasons. If people aren't free to make choices, even mistakes, they can't grow, learn, or develop their character. But Mill's vision of liberty wasn't just about protecting personal rights. It was about human flourishing. He believed that individuality, the ability to shape one's own path, was essential to happiness and progress. Different lifestyles, values, and opinions weren't problems to be solved. They were necessary for a vibrant society. Diversity wasn't just to be tolerated, it was to be celebrated, because it encouraged creativity, debate, and moral development. He also defended freedom of speech as a vital part of that growth. Even unpopular or wrong ideas, he argued, had value, either because they contained some truth, or because they force people to better understand and defend their own views. Mill combined the personal with the political. His version of liberty wasn't about doing whatever you want. It was about creating the conditions where people can think deeply, live fully, and contribute meaningfully. In a world of conformity and control, Mill's defense of individual freedom remains a powerful case for why liberty matters. Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin didn't just change how we view the natural world. He challenged how we think about life itself. In the 19th century, Darwin's groundbreaking theory of evolution by natural selection flipped the script on everything people thought they knew about creation and life's origins. Before Darwin, most people believed that life on Earth was created in a fixed, unchanging way, that each species was designed for a specific purpose and had remained the same since its creation. Darwin, however, proposed that life on Earth was not static, but had evolved over millions of years. According to Darwin, species didn't appear in their perfect form. Instead, they adapted over time based on environmental pressures. Those best suited to their surroundings survived and reproduced, passing on their traits. This process, which he called natural selection, explained how simple life forms could gradually evolve into the complex web of life we see today. One of Darwin's most radical ideas was that humans, too, were part of this natural process. He showed that humans didn't descend from a divine, separate creation, but were part of the same evolutionary chain as all other animals. This fundamentally challenged not just biology, but religious and philosophical ideas about human nature and purpose. Darwin's work didn't just spark scientific debate. It ignited a deeper discussion about humanity's place in the world. His challenge wasn't just to biology, it was to our self-conception, urging us to rethink our connection to the natural world. In the end, Darwin's challenge didn't just reshape science. It forced a new way of thinking about life, change, and the very nature of existence itself. His ideas continue to influence philosophy, ethics, and how we understand our relationship with the world around us. American pragmatism. Philosophy doesn't have to be abstract and distant. In fact, for the thinkers behind American pragmatism, it's all about finding practical, real-world solutions to everyday problems. Developed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by figures like Charles Peirce, William James, and John Dewey, American pragmatism focused on the idea that the value of an idea isn't in how well it fits into a philosophical system. It's in how well it works in practice. Pragmatists weren't interested in abstract truths that had no bearing on daily life. Instead, they believed that the best ideas are those that help us solve problems, improve society, and navigate our experiences effectively. At the heart of pragmatism is the belief that knowledge is not just about discovering fixed, eternal truths, but about understanding what works and how we can apply it. For example, rather than debating whether a tree falling in a forest makes a sound if no one's around to hear it, pragmatists would focus on how the idea of sound influences our behavior, decisions, and experiences. William James, one of the movement's most famous thinkers, argued that our beliefs should be judged by their practical consequences. If believing in something helps us live better or act more effectively, then it's a valid belief. It's not about being right for the sake of being right. It's about what helps people move forward. Pragmatism challenged traditional philosophy by emphasizing action, change, and progress. It offered a refreshing shift from abstract theorizing to actionable, flexible ideas that could adapt to life's complexities. In the end, American pragmatism redefined philosophy as a tool for improving real-life outcomes, not just understanding abstract truths. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't just ask questions about the world. He questioned everything we thought we knew about truth, morality, and even ourselves. Living in the 19th century, Nietzsche became famous for his radical critique of traditional philosophy and culture. His most famous declaration, "God is dead," wasn't a statement about religion itself, but about the way modern life had shifted. In a world where science, reason, and individualism were on the rise, the traditional religious and moral systems that once provided meaning no longer held the same power over people's lives. Nietzsche saw this as both a crisis and an opportunity. If the old values were fading, he argued, we could create new ones that were life-affirming, not life-denying. Central to his philosophy was the idea of the Übermensch, or overman. The Übermensch represents an individual who transcends societal norms, creating their own values and living authentically. This isn't about escaping responsibility, but about embracing the challenges of existence and becoming more than what society expects. Nietzsche also introduced the concept of the will to power, which he saw as a fundamental driving force in human life. It's not just about political control, but the drive to overcome obstacles, express creativity, and assert one's identity in a world that often feels chaotic or indifferent. At its core, Nietzsche's philosophy urges us to embrace life in all its complexity, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Instead of seeking comfort or certainty, He challenged us to face the world honestly, to question everything, and to forge our own path, regardless of external rules or norms. Nietzsche's ideas were unsettling, but they opened up new possibilities for how we think about freedom, meaning, and the human spirit. His influence continues to shape philosophy, psychology, and even art, pushing us to rethink what it means to live fully. Dostoevsky. Fyodor Dostoevsky didn't just write novels. He explored the darkest corners of the human soul. His philosophy isn't about neat, logical answers. It's about grappling with life's deepest contradictions. In 19th century Russia, Dostoevsky tackled questions of morality, freedom, and faith that still resonate today. He believed that human beings are complex and often torn between opposing desires, between good and evil, freedom and responsibility, faith and doubt. His novels, like Crime and Punishment, The Brothers Karamazov, and Notes from Underground, dive deep into these tensions, showing how individuals struggle with their own nature and the forces around them. One of Dostoevsky's most important ideas was the conflict between reason and emotion. In his view, rationalism alone couldn't solve the problems of the human heart. People weren't simply governed by logic. They were driven by passion, desire, and an inner conflict between higher ideals and baser instincts. In his famous character Raskolnikov, for example, we see someone trying to justify a crime through logic, only to be crushed by the emotional and spiritual consequences. He also questioned the notion of freedom. Dostoevsky argued that true freedom isn't just about doing whatever you want. It's about facing the burden of choice. People often create their own suffering by chasing empty freedom or by avoiding responsibility. In this sense, freedom requires self-awareness and moral commitment. At the heart of Dostoevsky's philosophy is his exploration of faith, and how, even in the face of suffering and doubt, humans seek meaning and redemption. His works force us to confront our own moral struggles, the complexities of free will, and the search for something greater than ourselves. Dostoevsky didn't give easy answers, but he gave us a raw, honest look at what it means to be human. His philosophy challenges us to think deeply about our choices, our values, and the truths we live by. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, argued that human behavior is deeply influenced by unconscious desires and conflicts, many of which we're not even aware of. Before Freud, people believed that the mind worked like a clear, logical machine. Freud shook that belief, suggesting instead that beneath the surface of our conscious thoughts, there's a hidden world of impulses, memories, and unresolved emotional issues driving much of what we do. At the heart of his theory is the idea that the mind is divided into three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is all about primal desires and urges like hunger, pleasure, or aggression. The superego, on the other hand, represents our moral standards and societal rules. The ego is the part that tries to balance the demands of both, finding realistic ways to satisfy the id while maintaining moral integrity. Freud also introduced the concept of repression, the idea that we push uncomfortable or threatening thoughts and memories out of our conscious awareness. But just because we forget doesn't mean these feelings go away. According to Freud, they often resurface in dreams, slips of the tongue, the famous Freudian slip, or neurotic behavior. His ideas about the unconscious mind, childhood trauma, and the role of sexuality in shaping personality were groundbreaking, though controversial. Freud didn't just focus on mental illness. He believed that understanding the unconscious could help anyone improve their self-awareness and live a more fulfilling life. While many of Freud's theories have been criticized or revised over time, his influence on psychology, literature, and even popular culture is undeniable. He opened the door to exploring the complex, often hidden world inside our minds. Early analytic logic. In the early 20th century, philosophers began to ask, how can we make language and reasoning clearer, more precise, and less ambiguous? The answer came in the form of analytic logic, a method of thinking that focused on breaking down statements and arguments into their simplest, most logical components. The movement, which started with figures like Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell, sought to improve how we understand and discuss complex ideas. Rather than relying on everyday language, which can be vague and open to interpretation, early analytic logic focused on formalizing arguments, using symbols and structures to clarify meaning and uncover hidden assumptions. At the heart of analytic logic is the idea of analyzing sentences or propositions based on their structure. For example, consider the statement, "All humans are mortal." In analytic logic, this could be broken down into simpler elements, humans and mortal as properties, and all as the universal quantifier. By examining these components, philosophers could explore the logical relationships between them and avoid confusion. Gottlob Frege, one of the pioneers of analytic logic, developed the idea of predicate logic, a system where we can evaluate the truth of statements more rigorously. Later, Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead worked to extend these ideas into symbolic logic, allowing them to express complex mathematical and philosophical concepts with much greater clarity and precision. The impact of early analytic logic was profound. It transformed philosophy from a field focused on abstract concepts and verbal debate into one that embraced clarity, precision, and systematic reasoning. By showing that language could be used as a tool to think more clearly, it laid the groundwork for developments in mathematics, computer science, and linguistics. Through logic, they not only reshaped philosophy, but provided a foundation for modern science and technology. Edmund Husserl wanted to find the foundations of human experience, a way to understand the world that was clear, certain, and undeniable. In the early 20th century, Husserl introduced a philosophical method called phenomenology, which focuses on examining the structures of experience itself. Rather than starting with abstract theories or scientific facts, phenomenology begins with how things appear to us, our direct experiences of the world. Husserl's key insight was that we often take our experiences for granted. For example, when you look at a tree, you don't question how you experience it. You simply see the tree. But Husserl asked, what is it that makes the tree appear to you in the first place? He wanted to dig deeper and understand the processes that allow us to perceive, interpret, and make sense of the world around us. To do this, Husserl used a method called epoché, or bracketing. This means setting aside assumptions, judgments, and even knowledge about the world to focus purely on our immediate experiences. For example, if you're looking at a chair, you don't think about its function or how it's made. Instead, you focus on your direct perception, the color, the shape, the texture, just as it appears to you in that moment. Phenomenology aimed to uncover the essential structures that make up human consciousness, like how we experience time, space, and objects. Husserl's philosophy wasn't just about describing experiences. It was about understanding the very act of experiencing itself. Through this method, Husserl influenced not only philosophy, but also psychology, linguistics, and even fields like artificial intelligence. His work showed us that to truly understand reality, we need to start by understanding how we experience it in the first place. Einstein. Albert Einstein didn't just revolutionize physics, he also changed how we think about knowledge itself. Einstein's theory of relativity didn't just shake up the laws of motion and gravity, it introduced a groundbreaking way of thinking about how we experience and understand reality. The core idea behind his relativity of knowledge is that our perception of the world isn't fixed or absolute. Instead, it's relative to the observer's position and speed. Take light, for example. In Einstein's view, light travels at the same speed, no matter how fast you're moving. This sounds simple, but it challenges everything we thought we knew about time and space. If you're moving quickly and pass a friend who is standing still, the way you both experience time and space isn't the same. The faster you move, the slower time appears to pass for you compared to someone at rest. This idea of time dilation upends the conventional idea that time flows at a constant rate for everyone. Einstein extended this concept to the nature of reality itself. Space and time are not separate, rigid entities. They are interconnected and flexible, forming a four-dimensional fabric that bends and stretches. Objects with mass, like stars or planets, warp this fabric, creating the effect we know as gravity. So, what you know about the universe depends on where you are and how fast you're moving. In essence, reality is shaped by your perspective. Einstein's relativity of knowledge isn't just about physics. It challenges the very way we understand truth and perception. It shows us that knowledge is not one size fits all. Instead, it's always shaped by context. And our experience of the world is just as dynamic as the world itself. Heidegger. Martin Heidegger wanted to explore a simple but profound question. What does it mean to be? In the 20th century, Heidegger shook up traditional philosophy with his focus on the concept of being. Not in the abstract sense, but in the most personal, everyday way. He believed that we often take our existence for granted, assuming we know what it means to be alive, to be conscious, or to experience the world. But Heidegger argued that we rarely stop to reflect on the deeper, more fundamental question. What does it truly mean to be? Heidegger's most famous work, Being and Time, aimed to address this very question. His answer begins with Dasein, a German word that translates roughly to being there. Dasein refers to our experience as human beings, our awareness of our existence and our place in the world. Heidegger believed that we can only understand the concept of being by looking at how we live in the world, rather than trying to define it in abstract terms. Dasein isn't just a passive observer, it's an active, engaged participant in life, shaped by time, experiences, and choices. He also discussed the concept of being toward death. Heidegger argued that by acknowledging our own mortality, we become more authentic in our choices and actions. Rather than avoiding the reality of death, facing it allows us to live more fully, understanding that time is limited and valuable. Heidegger's philosophy encourages us to reconsider the basic nature of existence. Instead of taking life for granted, he challenged us to recognize the deeper layers of meaning in every moment, experience, and choice. His work redefined existential thought and influenced everything from psychology to literature, leaving a lasting mark on how we view human life and meaning. Logical positivism. Imagine a world where everything we say must be either verifiable or scientifically meaningful. If it can't be proven through experience or experiments, it doesn't really have meaning. This is the core idea behind logical positivism. Developed in the early 20th century by a group of philosophers known as the Vienna Circle, logical positivism sought to clear away what they saw as the clutter of metaphysics, abstract philosophy, and speculative thinking. They argued that traditional philosophy often talked about things that couldn't be tested or measured, things like the existence of an afterlife or the nature of reality itself. According to logical positivism, if a statement couldn't be verified by empirical evidence, meaning it couldn't be tested through observation or experiments, it was meaningless, even if it seemed to make sense. For example, saying God exists or the universe is infinite may sound important, but from a logical positivist point of view, these are not scientific statements. They can't be tested or proven in any meaningful way, so they don't add knowledge about the world. On the other hand, statements like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level are meaningful because they can be tested and observed in the physical world. Logical positivism aimed to focus philosophy on the practical, clear, and scientific. They wanted to make sure that any claim had some connection to the real world, something we could test, measure, or observe. While logical positivism eventually faced criticism for being overly rigid and dismissing large areas of philosophical inquiry, its focus on clarity, precision, and the importance of empirical evidence continues to shape how we think about knowledge and science today. Karl Popper believed that science wasn't about proving things true, it was about testing them to see if they could be proven false. Popper, a 20th century philosopher of science, introduced a new way of thinking about knowledge and scientific progress. Before him, many philosophers thought science was about accumulating verified facts. But Popper challenged that idea. Instead of looking for evidence to confirm a theory, he argued that scientific theories should be framed in a way that makes them falsifiable, meaning they should be structured in a way that allows for the possibility of being proven wrong. For example, saying all swans are white is a testable claim, because all it takes is one black swan to disprove it. But Popper wasn't just interested in any statement that could be proven wrong. He believed that the best scientific theories are the ones that take risks and make bold predictions that challenge our current understanding of the world. Popper's philosophy doesn't just apply to science, it has broader implications for how we think about knowledge in general. He argued that ideas and theories are always open to revision or rejection. They should never be considered final. This mindset of constantly questioning, testing, and evolving is what drives progress in science and knowledge. His approach was revolutionary because it encouraged skepticism and saw knowledge as a dynamic process, not a collection of static facts. Popper's ideas laid the groundwork for modern scientific methods and helped shape how we approach everything from the development of new technologies to the way we critically examine our world. In a world where certainty is often prized, Popper's insistence on the power of doubt reminds us that progress comes not from proving things once and for all, but from continually questioning and testing the limits of what we know. Quine believed that the line between facts and theories isn't as clear as we often think. In fact, he argued that everything we know is connected, with no simple distinction between observation and interpretation. Quine was a 20th century philosopher who challenged some long-held assumptions about knowledge, meaning, and language. One of his most influential ideas was his critique of the analytic-synthetic distinction. Before Quine, many philosophers believed there were two kinds of statements: analytic ones, which were true by definition, like all bachelors are unmarried, and synthetic ones, which were true based on experience, like the sky is blue. Quine argued that this distinction doesn't really hold up. He claimed that even seemingly straightforward observations are shaped by background theories and assumptions. So, no statement is entirely independent of our prior beliefs. To explain this, Quine used the example of a simple observation like, "The cat is on the mat." While this might seem like an objective fact, it's influenced by our whole system of knowledge, our understanding of language, the world, and even how we interpret the word cat or mat. What we consider facts are always linked to a larger web of ideas and experiences, and changing one part of the web could change how we interpret everything else. Quine also famously argued against the idea that we can know things in isolation. Instead of seeing knowledge as a set of separate, isolated facts, he believed it's more like a network. When one part of the network is challenged, the whole system may need to adapt. Quine's ideas challenge the traditional boundaries between science, language, and philosophy, reshaping how we think about knowledge and the interconnectedness of human understanding. His work continues to influence debates in philosophy, linguistics, and cognitive science today. Wittgenstein. Ludwig Wittgenstein believed that many of our biggest philosophical problems arise from confusion about language. Wittgenstein, a 20th century philosopher, was fascinated by how words shape our understanding of the world. His key insight was that the meaning of a word is determined not by some abstract, fixed definition, but by how it's used in everyday life. In other words, language is a tool, and its meaning comes from context, not from a set of rigid rules. In his early work, especially in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, Wittgenstein suggested that the structure of language mirrors the structure of reality. For him, the goal of philosophy was to clarify language, to remove confusion, and show that many philosophical problems arise from misunderstandings about words and their use. Later, Wittgenstein took a different approach in his book, Philosophical Investigations. Instead of seeing language as a mirror of the world, he argued that meaning comes from the various ways words are used in different contexts. For example, the word game can refer to soccer, chess, or a card game. But the meaning of game isn't fixed. It changes depending on how it's used. The concept of a game is not one clear idea, but a series of overlapping connections, or what Wittgenstein called family resemblances. Wittgenstein's ideas challenge traditional philosophy by showing that the problems we face are often caused by the misuse or misunderstanding of language. By paying close attention to how words function in daily life, he believed we could clear up many of the confusions that lead to philosophical debates. In the end, Wittgenstein didn't offer solutions to specific problems. Instead, he taught us a new way to look at language and its role in shaping our reality. Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School wasn't just a group of philosophers. It was a movement that aimed to understand and critique society itself, from its culture to its politics. Emerging in the early 20th century in Germany, the Frankfurt School was a group of intellectuals who sought to explore how social, political, and economic structures shape human behavior and thought. They were influenced by Marxism, but combined it with a deep interest in psychology, culture, and philosophy, especially the works of figures like Freud and Hegel. One of the central ideas of the Frankfurt School was critical theory. Unlike traditional theories that tried to explain society in neutral terms, critical theory was about questioning the status quo, revealing the power structures that shape people's lives, often without them realizing it. This meant not just analyzing politics or economics, but also delving into art, media, and everyday life to understand how ideologies influence our thoughts and actions. The Frankfurt School thinkers argued that modern societies, especially capitalist ones, often lead to alienation, a sense of disconnection from ourselves, each other, and even the products we create. They believed that mass culture, particularly in the form of media, was often used to maintain the power of the elites, keeping people passive and distracted. This idea of culture industry suggested that entertainment, advertising, and consumerism were more about control than true artistic or personal expression. The Frankfurt School didn't offer easy solutions, but its members, thinkers like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and Herbert Marcuse, helped us see the deeper ways society shapes our lives. Their work continues to influence critical thought today, encouraging us to question how we live, consume, and interact with the world around us. Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that we're not born with a fixed purpose. Instead, we create our own meaning through the choices we make. Sartre was a 20th century French philosopher and one of the key figures of existentialism. His core idea was that existence comes before essence. This means that, unlike objects or machines that are designed with a specific purpose in mind, humans don't have an inherent nature or predetermined role. We aren't born with a blueprint for who we should be. Instead, we define ourselves through our actions and decisions. Sartre called this freedom radical freedom because it means we are completely free to choose how to live. But with this freedom comes a heavy responsibility. The choices we make shape our identity and affect the world around us. There's no escaping this responsibility, and it can be overwhelming. For Sartre, this is where existential anxiety, or angst, comes from. We are constantly faced with the challenge of choosing, and every choice reflects not just who we are, but what we believe everyone should be. This idea is often summed up by Sartre's famous phrase, "Man is condemned to be free." While freedom is empowering, it's also burdened with the weight of creating meaning in an indifferent, often absurd world. Sartre also argued that we are often tempted to escape this freedom, which is why many people adopt roles or follow societal norms without questioning them. He called this bad faith, living inauthentically by pretending we are defined by external labels or expectations. In the end, Sartre's philosophy encourages us to embrace our freedom, confront our anxiety, and take full responsibility for the lives we choose to create. His ideas continue to shape discussions on identity, morality, and the search for meaning in a modern world. Albert Camus didn't shy away from life's harshest truth, life is absurd, but rather than being discouraged, he saw it as an invitation to live more authentically. Camus was a 20th century French philosopher and writer, often associated with existentialism, though he called himself an absurdist. The core of his philosophy revolves around the idea that life has no inherent meaning. From the moment we're born, we search for purpose, truth, and order in the world. Yet no matter how hard we try, the universe remains indifferent, and the meaning we seek never fully materializes. This is the absurd, the clash between our human need for meaning and the silent, uncaring cosmos. But Camus didn't think this led to despair. Instead, he argued that acknowledging the absurdity of life can be liberating. The key, he believed, is to embrace the absurd and keep living fully, without resorting to false hopes or illusions. He famously discussed this in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, where he compares human life to the Greek myth of Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down each time. Camus suggests that, like Sisyphus, we must imagine ourselves happy as we face the absurdity of our existence, finding purpose in the act of living itself, not in some distant goal or final resolution. Camus also argued for rebellion, not against life, but against the hopelessness of searching for meaning in a world that offers none. His idea was that we should focus on living with awareness, joy, and solidarity with others, even knowing that life itself might not make sense. By confronting life's absurdity directly, Camus showed that we have the freedom to create our own meaning, even in the face of uncertainty. Simone de Beauvoir. Simone de Beauvoir believed that one of the most powerful forces shaping our lives isn't something we're born with, it's something we're taught: gender. In her groundbreaking work, The Second Sex, de Beauvoir argued that society doesn't just create differences between men and women, it creates inequality. She famously stated, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." This wasn't just about biological sex, but about the roles society forces upon individuals based on their gender. According to de Beauvoir, women have been historically defined as the other, always in relation to men, who are seen as the default or the norm. This creates a system where women are taught to be passive, subordinate, and dependent. De Beauvoir's philosophy was deeply rooted in existentialism. Like other existentialists, she believed that existence precedes essence. This means that we aren't born with a fixed identity or predetermined role. Instead, we create our own essence through our actions and choices. For de Beauvoir, this applies to women too. She argued that women could and should break free from these societal roles, challenging the expectations placed upon them and striving for the freedom to define their own lives. One of her key ideas was liberation through self-creation. Instead of accepting the roles handed to them, women should assert their independence, make their own decisions, and challenge systems of oppression. She saw women's liberation as integral to human freedom as a whole. Simone de Beauvoir's work is a powerful call for equality and autonomy. Her ideas not only transformed feminist thought, but also reshaped how we think about freedom, identity, and how society influences the roles we take on in life. Structuralism. Imagine you're reading a novel, and everything from the characters to the plot twists seems to be part of a bigger, hidden structure. This is the essence of structuralism. The idea that the world, including language, culture, and society, works like a complex system of interrelated parts. Emerging in the early 20th century, structuralism was largely influenced by linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. He argued that words don't have meaning on their own. Instead, their meaning comes from how they relate to other words in a system. For example, the word cat only has meaning because it's different from dog, mouse, or bird. So, meaning isn't inherent in individual words. It's shaped by their relationships within the broader structure of language. This idea expanded beyond language. Structuralists believed that all human culture, from myths to social norms, could be understood by looking at the hidden structures that shape them. Take, for instance, myths. The same types of characters and themes, like heroes, villains, and quests, show up across different cultures and time periods. For structuralists, this wasn't coincidence. It pointed to a deeper, universal structure in the human mind that organizes how we think and understand the world. Claude Lévi-Strauss applied this thinking to anthropology, suggesting that the same underlying structures govern human societies, particularly in the way we categorize and organize experiences, like the concepts of good and evil, nature and culture, or raw and cooked. In short, structuralism was about finding patterns beneath the surface. It helped shift how we think about culture, language, and society, not as isolated parts, but as interconnected systems. Understanding these structures, according to structuralists, is the key to understanding human experience itself. Foucault, Michel Foucault was obsessed with one question: how does power shape our lives, even in ways we don't see? Foucault, a French philosopher of the 20th century, shifted the focus of philosophy away from traditional ideas about morality or freedom and toward how power operates within society. His core insight was that power isn't just something that rulers or governments wield over others. It's everywhere. It's in the way we think, speak, and even organize our daily lives. One of his most famous ideas was the concept of disciplinary power. Foucault argued that modern societies exercise control not just through laws or force, but by shaping behavior and norms. For example, think of a school or a prison. The way we structure space, the way time is divided, and the rules we follow all work to shape how we behave. It's not just the rules themselves, but the very way we are taught to think about rules, behavior, and authority that maintains control. Foucault also explored how power is linked to knowledge. He introduced the idea of power knowledge, suggesting that what we consider truth is often shaped by those in power. For example, how mental illness was viewed historically shifted dramatically over time. At one point, people with mental disorders were seen as morally or spiritually flawed. Later, medical professionals began framing it as a scientific issue. Foucault argued that each shift wasn't just about knowledge changing. It was about who had the power to define what was true. Ultimately, Foucault wanted us to see that power is not just something imposed from the outside. It's something we internalize, something that shapes the very way we see ourselves and the world around us. By questioning how power operates, Foucault changed how we think about freedom, identity, and society itself. Derrida. Jacques Derrida made us rethink the very idea of meaning, suggesting that language is not a simple tool for communication, but something far more slippery and complex. Derrida, a French philosopher, is best known for developing a concept called deconstruction. At its core, deconstruction is the idea that language doesn't simply represent reality, it shapes and complicates our understanding of it. When we use words, Derrida argued, they're always tied to other words and meanings, creating a web of connections that never fully capture the thing we're trying to describe. This means that every text or statement is open to multiple interpretations, and nothing ever has one fixed meaning. For example, when you hear the word tree, it's not just about the physical object. You might think of its shade, its leaves, or even childhood memories of climbing trees. In Derrida's view, tree is linked to all sorts of other ideas, and its meaning is shaped by the context in which it's used. Even the simplest words are tangled in this complex network of associations. Derrida also challenged the traditional philosophical belief that there's a clear, stable meaning in language. Instead, he argued that meaning is always deferred, never fully reachable. He called this the difference. A play on words that suggests meaning is always in flux, shaped by the constant movement of language itself. While deconstruction might sound abstract, it's deeply impactful. Derrida's ideas have influenced everything from literary criticism to law, showing us that the way we understand the world is always more complex and uncertain than we think. In a world filled with words, Derrida helped us see that meaning isn't something we simply grasp. It's something we constantly negotiate. Post-colonial voices. Post-colonial voices challenge the dominant narratives of history, power, and identity, revealing the deep scars left by colonization and the ongoing impact on former colonies. In the 20th century, as countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America gained independence, a new wave of thinkers began questioning the lasting effects of European colonialism. Post-colonial philosophy is concerned with how colonized peoples have been shaped by centuries of domination, exploitation, and cultural erasure. Key thinkers like Frantz Fanon, Edward Said, and Homi K. Bhabha explored how colonial powers defined their identities in opposition to those they colonized, creating lasting systems of inequality and cultural oppression. One of the central ideas in post-colonial thought is that colonialism didn't just involve the physical control of lands. It also involved controlling knowledge, culture, and identity. Edward Said's concept of Orientalism, for example, showed how Western scholars and artists constructed a distorted image of the East, portraying it as exotic, backward, and in need of Western intervention. This distorted image justified colonization and reinforced the idea that the West was superior. Post-colonial thinkers also examine the legacies of colonial rule in modern society. They explore how language, literature, and even national borders were shaped by colonial powers, often leading to struggles over identity and belonging in post-colonial nations. Importantly, post-colonial philosophy isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how colonial history continues to influence global relations, social structures, and personal identities today. It calls for reclaiming voice and agency for those who were once silenced, and offers a powerful way of rethinking history, identity, and power in the modern world. Deep ecology. Deep ecology is a philosophy that shifts the way we think about our relationship with the environment. Instead of seeing nature as something separate from us, something to use or control, deep ecology argues that humans are just one part of a much larger, interconnected system, and that we must respect and protect the environment for its own sake. Developed in the 1970s by philosopher Arne Næss, deep ecology goes beyond the typical environmentalism of the time. It challenges the idea that nature is only valuable in terms of how it benefits humans, like for resources or recreation. Instead, it claims that all living beings, animals, plants, ecosystems, have intrinsic value. In other words, they deserve to exist and thrive, regardless of how they might be useful to us. One of the key ideas in deep ecology is the principle of biospheric egalitarianism. This suggests that all forms of life, from the smallest insect to the largest tree, have an equal right to live and flourish. It's a radical shift from the human-centered thinking that has often led to environmental degradation. For deep ecology, protecting the environment isn't just about saving nature for human survival. It's about recognizing that the earth and its creatures are valuable in their own right. The philosophy also calls for a major shift in how we live. Næss suggested that we need to rethink our lifestyle and consumption habits, advocating for less materialism and more sustainable, respectful ways of interacting with nature. This means questioning practices that exploit the environment and focusing on the long-term health of ecosystems. By emphasizing the interconnectedness of all life, deep ecology encourages a deeper, more holistic way of thinking, one that views the planet as a shared home that we must care for, not just a resource to be mined. Peter Singer believes that ethics should be universal and that the way we treat others, whether humans or animals, should be based on their ability to suffer, not their species or status. A 20th and 21st century philosopher, Peter Singer, is best known for his work on utilitarianism, the ethical theory that actions should be judged by their consequences, specifically how much they promote happiness or reduce suffering. But what sets Singer apart is how he extends this principle beyond just humans to include animals, urging us to consider their suffering as much as our own. Singer's most famous concept is the expanding circle of ethics. He argued that we traditionally limit our moral concern to people who are close to us, family, friends, or fellow citizens. But as we expand our circle, we should recognize that other beings, especially animals, are capable of suffering just like us. This challenges the idea that it's okay to treat animals as we please simply because they are different from us. For Singer, this leads to the argument for animal rights, that we should change our habits, like factory farming and animal testing, because these practices cause unnecessary suffering. In addition to his work on animal rights, Singer is also a vocal advocate for global poverty relief. He argues that affluent people should do more to help those in extreme poverty, suggesting that we have a moral obligation to give up part of our wealth to reduce suffering wherever it is found in the world. Peter Singer's ideas push us to rethink where our ethical concerns should lie, asking us to consider the broader impacts of our actions and to treat all sentient beings with equal consideration. His philosophy continues to shape discussions on ethics, animal rights, and global justice today. Rawls versus Nozick. When it comes to justice and fairness, two prominent philosophers, John Rawls and Robert Nozick, presented very different views on how society should be structured. John Rawls, in his book A Theory of Justice, proposed a vision of justice based on fairness. He introduced the idea of the original position, a hypothetical scenario where people choose the rules for society without knowing their own place in it. The idea is that without knowing if you're rich or poor, healthy or sick, you choose a system that benefits everyone, especially the most disadvantaged. This became his difference principle, which argues that social inequalities are acceptable only if they benefit the least advantaged members of society. For Rawls, justice means ensuring everyone has equal opportunities and that society provides a safety net for those who are struggling. On the other hand, Robert Nozick, in his book Anarchy, State and Utopia, argued for a minimal state with limited interference. He believed in entitlement theory, which states that individuals have the right to their property and resources as long as they acquired them fairly. Nozick rejected Rawls' idea of redistributing wealth, arguing that taking from the rich to help the poor was a violation of individual rights. For him, the role of government should be as minimal as possible, mainly to protect property and prevent harm. The debate between Rawls and Nozick continues to influence modern political philosophy. Rawls' focus on fairness challenges us to think about the collective good and inequality, while Nozick's emphasis on individual freedom pushes us to question the limits of government intervention. Their ideas represent two fundamental approaches to justice, one centered on equality and fairness, and the other on liberty and personal rights. Ethics of care. The ethics of care isn't about abstract rules or principles. It's about relationships, empathy, and understanding the needs of others. Developed by philosophers like Carol Gilligan and Nell Noddings, the ethics of care challenges traditional moral philosophies that emphasize fairness, justice, and equality. Instead, it focuses on the importance of care and compassion in human relationships. While other ethical theories might prioritize rights or duties, the ethics of care asks us to think about how we can nurture and support those around us, especially those who are vulnerable or dependent. At its core, the ethics of care emphasizes empathy and the interconnectedness of individuals. For example, a parent caring for a child doesn't just follow rules or calculate what's fair. They respond to the child's emotional and physical needs, offering support and protection. The theory argues that moral decisions should consider the context of relationships and how our actions affect the people we care for, rather than being solely based on abstract principles. This idea has been particularly influential in areas like education, healthcare, and social work, where personal relationships and compassion are at the forefront. It suggests that we should approach ethics not with a rigid set of rules, but with an understanding of our responsibilities to others and an openness to their unique needs and experiences. The ethics of care highlights how important care, empathy, and responsibility are in building strong, supportive communities. It encourages us to move beyond individual rights or impersonal fairness, recognizing that human relationships are central to our moral lives. In a world often focused on justice and individual achievement, the ethics of care offers a vital reminder about the power of connection, kindness, and shared responsibility. Judith Butler. Judith Butler challenged the very way we think about gender, showing us that it's not something we're born with, but something we do. Butler, a 20th century philosopher, is best known for her work on gender theory, particularly her book, Gender Trouble. She argued that gender isn't a fixed identity or biological truth, but rather something that is constantly performed. According to Butler, we don't have a gender because of who we are internally. We enact gender through our actions, speech, and behaviors. This idea is called performative theory, meaning that gender is not something we are, but something we do repeatedly through social expectations and cultural norms. For example, when someone acts in ways that align with societal expectations of masculinity or femininity, they are performing those roles, not expressing an inherent identity. Butler believed that because these performances are socially constructed, they can also be deconstructed. In other words, the way we perform gender isn't inevitable. We can challenge and reshape it. Butler's theory has been groundbreaking in the way it opened up space for more fluid and diverse understandings of gender. It has been especially influential in feminist, LGBTQ+, and queer studies, as it challenges binary thinking and highlights how much of our identity is shaped by society's expectations. Her ideas also have profound implications for how we think about power and control. By recognizing that gender is performative, Butler encouraged a broader understanding of human identity, one that embraces flexibility and breaks free from rigid, traditional roles. In doing so, she helped shift the conversation from viewing gender as a static fact to seeing it as a dynamic, evolving expression of who we choose to be. Baudrillard. Jean Baudrillard argued that in today's world, we're surrounded by so much information and media that we can no longer tell what's real from what's not. Baudrillard, a French philosopher and sociologist, became famous for his ideas about hyperreality, the state where the distinction between the real world and the simulated world blurs. He argued that in our modern, media-driven society, we are constantly exposed to images, advertisements, and narratives that represent reality. But these representations often replace the actual experience of reality itself. For example, think of a theme park like Disneyland. It's designed to look and feel like a magical, idealized world. But the park itself isn't a real place. It's a simulation of a perfect world. In Baudrillard's view, Disneyland isn't just a place for entertainment. It's a metaphor for how much of our lives are shaped by simulations. We interact more with images, brands, and media narratives than with the real world. And sometimes we lose track of what's truly authentic. Baudrillard also suggested that society increasingly relies on these simulations for meaning. Take social media as another example. Platforms like Instagram often create idealized versions of people's lives, filtered, curated, and polished. These curated images become more significant than the actual messy experiences of real life. We might begin to live not for the experiences themselves, but for the image or the story that surrounds them. Baudrillard's ideas challenge the way we think about reality, authenticity, and value in a world oversaturated with media. He forces us to reconsider whether we are truly experiencing the world or just consuming representations of it. His work continues to shape discussions on media, culture, and technology today. Žižek, Slavoj Žižek, is known for challenging everything we think we know about society, culture, and ideology, often by pointing out the contradictions in the very things we take for granted. Žižek, a contemporary philosopher from Slovenia, draws on the traditions of Marxism, psychoanalysis, and Lacanian theory to examine how ideology shapes our lives. His central idea is that our world is full of hidden structures and beliefs that influence our behavior, often without us realizing it. For Žižek, ideology isn't just about politics or economics. It's about the subconscious beliefs that drive our daily actions, even in the most ordinary aspects of life. One of his most famous ideas is that ideology doesn't just influence the way we think, it structures how we experience reality. For example, think about the way we consume media. We might think we're simply enjoying a movie or a TV show, but Žižek argues that we're also engaging with deeper ideological messages about consumerism, identity, or societal norms. The images and stories we consume subtly reinforce certain beliefs about the world, even if we don't consciously agree with them. Žižek also explores the role of desire in shaping our world. Drawing on Freud and Lacan, he suggests that what we desire often doesn't align with what we truly need. This leads to a kind of false satisfaction, where we think we're fulfilling our desires, but we're only creating new ones in the process. In a world where things often seem out of our control, Žižek's philosophy is a wake-up call to examine the hidden forces shaping our behavior. His work pushes us to question not just the obvious, but the subtle, unconscious systems that govern our thoughts and actions, and how they might be holding us back from true change. Panpsychism and IIT. Imagine if everything around us, not just humans or animals, but even rocks, trees, and atoms, had some form of consciousness. That's the idea at the heart of panpsychism, a fascinating philosophy that suggests consciousness isn't limited to brains or minds, but is a fundamental part of all matter. Panpsychism proposes that consciousness, in some basic form, exists in everything. It's not that a rock has the same awareness as a human, but rather that all things possess some degree of experience or awareness. Think of it like this. Instead of consciousness emerging only when brains develop, it's more like a property that exists at some level throughout the universe. A tiny particle might have a very simple, minimal form of awareness, while humans and animals have a more complex and developed form. Now, combine this idea with the integrated information theory, which offers a framework for understanding consciousness. IIT, developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, suggests that consciousness arises from the integration of information. The more interconnected and complex the system, the richer the conscious experience. So, according to IIT, even basic systems might have some level of integrated information, and thus some form of basic consciousness. Together, panpsychism and IIT open up a radically different way of thinking about consciousness. Rather than seeing the mind as something entirely separate from the physical world, these ideas propose that consciousness is embedded in the very fabric of reality itself, with different levels of complexity across all forms of existence. This perspective challenges our traditional understanding of consciousness, suggesting that maybe everything, from the tiniest particle to the largest galaxy, has some degree of awareness, transforming how we think about life, intelligence, and the universe itself. Zen and mindfulness. Zen and mindfulness may sound like trendy buzzwords, but at their core, they're about living in the present moment and finding peace through direct experience. Zen is a form of Buddhism that originated in China and later spread to Japan. It focuses on meditation as a way to awaken to the present moment. Zen encourages letting go of distracting thoughts and simply experiencing life as it is, without judgment or attachment. One of its most famous practices is zazen, or seated meditation, where practitioners sit quietly and focus on their breath, or just on being present, allowing thoughts to come and go without getting caught up in them. Mindfulness, though rooted in Buddhist tradition, has become widely popular in the West as a way of coping with stress and improving well-being. It involves paying attention to the present moment, with full awareness and without judgment. The goal is to experience each moment fully, whether you're eating, walking, or even just breathing. By being mindful, you start to notice the small details that often pass by unnoticed, helping you engage with life more deeply. Both Zen and mindfulness ask us to slow down and stop living on autopilot. They teach that much of our suffering comes from being caught in our thoughts, regrets, or anxieties about the future. Instead, by practicing mindfulness, we can break free from the constant stream of mental noise and simply experience life as it is, moment by moment. What makes these practices powerful is their simplicity. They don't require complex rituals or distant goals. The focus is on the here and now, teaching us to find calm and clarity in our everyday lives. Whether through Zen meditation or simple mindfulness exercises, the practice of being fully present can help us live more peacefully and authentically. Climate ethics. Climate ethics is a branch of philosophy that asks how we should think about our responsibilities toward the environment and future generations. It doesn't just focus on the science of climate change, but on the moral implications. Who should bear the costs of addressing it? And what obligations do we have to the planet and each other? At the heart of climate ethics is the idea of intergenerational justice. This means that current generations have a responsibility to future ones to prevent further environmental damage. We are using up resources and creating pollution that future generations will have to deal with. And climate ethicists argue that we should act to preserve a livable world for them, even if it means making sacrifices today. Another key aspect of climate ethics is distributive justice. This asks, who should bear the burden of climate change? While wealthy countries have contributed the most to pollution, poorer countries are often the ones suffering the worst consequences, even though they've done the least to cause the problem. Climate ethicists debate how to distribute responsibility fairly, whether it's through emissions reductions, financial support for vulnerable communities, or changes in consumption habits. Finally, climate ethics also challenges the way we view nature. Is the environment something we own and can exploit, or is it something we must protect and respect as part of a larger interconnected system? Ultimately, climate ethics pushes us to rethink not only our relationship with the environment, but also our moral duties to one another, now and in the future. it invites us to reflect on how our choices today shape the world tomorrow. Digital surveillance. In today's digital age, it's hard to go anywhere without leaving a trace behind. From social media to online shopping, our every move is tracked, often without us even realizing it. This is the world of digital surveillance. Digital surveillance refers to the collection and monitoring of data from individuals through digital technologies. Governments, corporations, and even individuals track everything from your internet searches to your location through your phone. While this might seem convenient for personalized services, it raises significant ethical and privacy concerns. The core issue of digital surveillance is the balance between security and personal freedom. On one hand, surveillance can be used for public safety, like monitoring for criminal activity or preventing terrorism. On the other hand, it can easily be misused, violating privacy rights and enabling unjust control over individuals' lives. For instance, data collected without consent can be used to manipulate behavior or restrict freedoms. Philosophers debate where to draw the line. Some argue that if surveillance is used for the common good, like keeping citizens safe, it's justified. Others warn that mass surveillance can lead to a loss of autonomy, as people might start to change their behavior, knowing they're being watched. This is known as the chilling effect, when people censor themselves out of fear of being monitored. As technology advances, the line between public safety and individual rights becomes increasingly blurry. Digital surveillance not only challenges our ideas of privacy, but also forces us to reconsider our relationship with power, control, and freedom in the modern world. Ultimately, digital surveillance forces us to ask, how much control are we willing to give up in exchange for security? And what kind of society do we want to build around this balance? Philosophy of information. In a world where data is everywhere, the philosophy of information helps us understand what information really is, how it shapes our lives, and how we should think about it. The philosophy of information is a relatively new area of thought that explores the nature of information itself. It asks questions like, what does it mean for something to be informative? How does information influence knowledge and reality? And how do digital technologies change how we interact with and understand the world? One key idea in this field is that information is not just about facts or data. It's a fundamental building block of knowledge. Information can shape our understanding of reality and influence our decisions. Think about how the information you receive daily, from the news, social media, or even advertisements, affects how you see the world, your values, and your actions. The way information is presented, filtered, or distorted also plays a role in shaping your perception of truth. Another important aspect of the philosophy of information is the rise of artificial intelligence. With machines now able to process and interpret vast amounts of data, questions arise about the relationship between humans and machines, and whether machines could ever truly understand or create information in the way humans do. This challenges our understanding of consciousness, knowledge, and intelligence. At its core, the philosophy of information is about more than just technology. It's about how we, as human beings, interact with the information that shapes our world, how we create, share, and process it, and what it means for our understanding of reality, truth, and even ourselves. In a world where information is power, this philosophical exploration becomes essential for understanding the digital age. Artificial intelligence ethics. As artificial intelligence becomes a bigger part of our lives, we must ask, how should we treat machines that make decisions for us? This is the core of AI ethics, a field that explores the moral questions surrounding AI technologies. AI ethics is concerned with how we design, use, and govern AI systems in ways that align with human values, fairness, and justice. As AI systems are used for everything from healthcare and hiring to self-driving cars and social media, the choices these systems make can have real-world consequences on people's lives. The key question is, how do we ensure that AI decisions are fair, transparent, and accountable? One big challenge is the potential for bias in AI. These systems are built on data, and if that data reflects existing prejudices, like discrimination based on race or gender, the AI can unintentionally perpetuate those biases. For example, an AI designed to evaluate job candidates might unfairly favor certain demographics if it's trained on biased hiring data. This raises ethical questions about who controls the data, how it's used, and what happens when things go wrong. Another issue is the idea of responsibility. If an AI system makes a harmful decision, who should be held accountable? Is it the creators, the companies using the AI, or the AI itself? This becomes especially important with autonomous technologies like self-driving cars, where decisions can directly impact human safety. AI ethics also considers the potential of AI to replace jobs and the future of work. It asks us to think about how AI could change society and what new responsibilities we have in a world where machines are increasingly part of our daily lives. In the end, AI ethics is about ensuring that these powerful technologies serve humanity in ways that are just, safe, and aligned with our values, making it a critical area of philosophical inquiry as AI continues to evolve. Transhumanism. Imagine a future where human beings can enhance their physical and mental abilities beyond what we thought was possible. This is the vision of transhumanism, a philosophy that aims to use technology to improve and even transcend the limitations of human biology. Transhumanism is based on the idea that humans can and should use technology to enhance their bodies and minds. This might include things like genetic engineering, brain-machine interfaces, or advanced robotics. The goal is to overcome aging, disease, and even death, pushing humanity toward what some thinkers call a post-human future. One key aspect of transhumanism is the belief that technological advancements, particularly in fields like biotechnology and artificial intelligence, offer unprecedented opportunities for human progress. Imagine being able to upload your consciousness into a computer, or using gene editing to cure hereditary diseases. These are just a few examples of what transhumanists envision. The idea is not just to improve human life, but to radically transform it, making us healthier, smarter, and longer living. However, transhumanism raises some important ethical questions. What happens to personal identity if we can modify our brains or our bodies? Who controls these technologies, and how do we ensure they're used for the common good? Could the pursuit of extreme enhancements create a divide between those who can afford these technologies and those who can't? These concerns are central to the ongoing debate about the future of human enhancement. In the end, transhumanism isn't just about improving technology, it's about rethinking what it means to be human. It asks how far we're willing to go to change ourselves and whether the pursuit of perfection is something to celebrate or fear. Simulation. Hypothesis. Have you ever wondered if the world around you is real, or if it's all just a sophisticated simulation? The simulation hypothesis suggests that we might be living in a computer-generated reality, and everything we experience, from the air we breathe to our own thoughts, could be part of a program designed by an advanced civilization. The simulation hypothesis was popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom in the early 2000s. Bostrom argued that at some point, advanced civilizations may develop the technology to create simulations so realistic that the simulated beings inside them would have no idea they're living in a virtual world. In this scenario, our entire universe could be one of these simulations. To make it even more mind-boggling, Bostrom suggested that if civilizations keep running simulations, there could be far more simulated realities than real ones, making it statistically likely that we're living in one. Think of it like a video game. In modern games, characters have intricate lives and environments, but they don't know they're part of a program. In the same way, we could be characters in a simulation designed by future beings who are far more advanced than us. The simulation is so perfect that we experience it as real. Now, this idea raises some intriguing questions. If we're living in a simulation, who created it and why? Is there a purpose, or are we just a side effect of some advanced civilization's curiosity or entertainment? And what happens if we uncover the truth? The simulation hypothesis challenges the very nature of reality. Whether it's a literal truth or not, it pushes us to rethink our understanding of existence and what it means to be real. Effective altruism. Effective altruism is all about doing the most good you can with the resources you have in the most effective way possible. At its core, effective altruism is a movement that encourages people to think carefully about how they can make a positive impact on the world. Instead of simply donating to causes that feel good or look urgent, effective altruists focus on finding the most effective ways to help others, using evidence and reason to guide their decisions. For example, many people might donate to local charities or causes that are personally meaningful to them. While this is a good thing, effective altruists argue that we should also consider global issues, like extreme poverty or global health, where our resources can have a much larger impact. They might choose to donate to organizations that have been shown to save lives at a low cost, such as programs providing malaria nets in sub-Saharan Africa. The idea is to maximize the good you do. Effective altruism looks at evidence and asks, where can our time, money, or effort make the biggest difference? It encourages people to go beyond what feels good in the moment and to think strategically about their actions. One of the most interesting parts of effective altruism is the idea that you can make a difference not just through charity, but by changing your career or lifestyle to focus on the most pressing global problems. Some effective altruists even choose careers that directly address issues like climate change, global health, or animal welfare, believing that their time spent on these causes is the best way to make an impact. Ultimately, effective altruism is a call to think carefully about how we can make the world better, not just through good intentions, but through thoughtful, evidence-based action. Meta-philosophy. Meta-philosophy might sound like an abstract term, but it's actually a simple question. What is philosophy itself, and how do we know if we're doing it right? Meta-philosophy is the study of philosophy's methods, aims, and boundaries. While philosophy is traditionally concerned with big questions about existence, knowledge, ethics, and reality, meta-programming steps back and asks, what counts as a philosophical question, and how should we approach it? In other words, it's philosophy about philosophy. Think about how scientists question the methods of science. For instance, if a scientist is conducting an experiment, they might wonder, are my methods valid? Is my reasoning sound? Meta-philosophy does the same thing, but for the entire field of philosophy. It examines how we define philosophical problems, how we argue about solutions, and whether philosophy can even lead to answers. One area of meta-theory is thinking about how philosophy changes over time. Philosophers have different schools of thought, such as analytic philosophy, continental philosophy, or pragmatism. Metaphilosophy helps us ask, what makes these approaches different, and which is the best way to think about the world? Can one philosophical method prove to be more useful than another? It also raises questions about the very role of philosophy in modern society. Should philosophy try to solve practical problems, or is it more about exploring ideas for their own sake? Is philosophy a discipline that leads to answers, or is it primarily about asking questions? In the end, metaphilosophy challenges us to think critically about how we think. It invites us to consider not just what we're thinking, but how we're doing the thinking itself. Where could philosophy go next? Philosophy has always been about exploring the big questions. What is the nature of reality? What does it mean to live a good life? But as the world changes, so too does the direction of philosophical inquiry. So, where could philosophy go next? In recent years, philosophy has begun to move beyond its traditional boundaries. Historically, it's been focused on abstract, theoretical questions about existence, knowledge, and ethics. But today, many philosophers are turning their attention to practical concerns, engaging with real-world issues like climate change, technology, and social justice. As new challenges arise, the question is not just what is true, but how we can apply philosophy to create a better, more sustainable world. One emerging area of focus is the philosophy of technology, especially as artificial intelligence and biotechnology progress rapidly. Philosophers are grappling with questions about the ethical implications of these advancements. What does it mean to be human in a world where we can enhance our bodies or upload our minds into machines? How should we regulate AI to prevent harm or exploitation? Another growing field is the philosophy of mind and consciousness. As neuroscience advances, we're learning more about how the brain works, but big questions remain. What is consciousness? Can machines ever become conscious? How does subjective experience arise from physical matter? Philosophy is also being shaped by interdisciplinary collaboration. Philosophers are working closely with scientists, economists, and sociologists to better understand the complexities of the world and apply philosophical principles to modern-day problems. Ultimately, philosophy's next step will likely be one that embraces both old wisdom and new insights. It's no longer just about pondering abstract ideas in isolation. It's about using philosophy to navigate the fast-changing world around us and making a real impact on how we live.